Yo! Welcome to Vision. Harry got an absolute banger for you today. Fawkes bonded with Harry at sorting and burned away 33 blocks, revealing Dumbledore's master plan. Like, subscribe, comment below. Let's go. Chapter 1, The Burning Ceiling. The boats moved without oars. Harry had stopped trying to figure out how anything worked about 20 minutes ago. Somewhere between the moving staircases he'd spotted through the castle's upper windows, and the moment Hagrid had simply knocked on a solid mountainside and a door had appeared in the rock like it had always been embarrassed to be a door. He'd filed it under magic, the same mental folder that now contained Owl's delivering post, a vault full of gold that apparently belonged to him, and the fact that he apparently belonged here at all. The lake was black and still. The castle above it was lit gold, every tower window burning warm against the September sky, and Harry watched it and felt something he hadn't felt since he was very small, before the cupboard, before the Dursleys had gotten very good at making him feel like a mistake. He felt like he was going somewhere. Not just moving. Going. Like a compass needle swinging into alignment. Beside him, Ron Weasley was whispering rapidly about the giant squid. On his other side, Hermione Granger had been quiet for 3 full minutes, which Harry suspected was unusual for her based on the preceding hour of boat travel in which she had explained the school's founding, the properties of enchanted water, and the likely genus of at least 2 plants they'd passed on the bank. The quiet meant she was thinking very hard about something, her eyes moving upward to the castle with that particular focused look that Harry was already starting to recognize, the one that meant she'd noticed something everyone else had missed. He didn't ask. The boats scraped gravel and they all stumbled onto the bank. Hagrid herded them through a door so large it seemed designed for a different species, which Harry supposed it might have been, and then a stern-faced woman in emerald robes was standing before them all in a torchlit entrance chamber, and the chaos of 41st years slowly compressed into a shuffling, nervous silence. Professor McGonagall. Harry had been told her name and immediately believed it was exactly right. She looked at them the way you might look at a batch of bread you weren't yet sure had risen properly, and then she explained the houses with the precise economy of someone who had done it hundreds of times and had long since stopped worrying about making it exciting. Gryffindor. Hufflepuff. Ravenclaw. Slytherin. The words landed with different weights on different students. Harry watched a few of them go slightly pale. He watched a girl with a Slytherin-shaped jaw set her shoulders like she was preparing for a fight she'd been expecting. Worth remembering, Harry thought. He was nervous. He'd be lying if he said otherwise, a prickling, electric nervousness that lived in his palms and the back of his neck and had nothing to do with being scared of failure. It was the nervousness of standing at the edge of something real for the very first time in your life and knowing, in your bones, that what happened next mattered. They filed through enormous doors into the great hall. Harry had a single, overwhelming impression, sky, before he started processing the details. The ceiling above wasn't a ceiling. It was the night itself, deep indigo and star-scattered, clouds drifting through it slow and real, and the candlelight from what had to be hundreds of floating candles caught on nothing below that vast open dark, which meant the light just rose and dissolved and the room felt endless. 4 long tables. Hundreds of students already seated, all of them turned to watch the first years shuffle in. A staff table at the far end where teachers sat in a row, watching with varying degrees of interest. Harry scanned the staff table the way he always scanned rooms, quickly, looking for the source of whatever needed to be navigated. His eyes moved past faces he didn't know yet, and then stopped. Dumbledore was watching him. Not watching the group. Watching him. The old man sat at the center of the staff table in robes the color of midnight shot through with silver thread, his half-moon spectacles catching the candlelight, his long silver beard tucked neatly over one shoulder, and his eyes, which were very, very blue, Harry noticed, that particular shade of blue that belongs to deep water or old glaciers, were fixed on Harry with an expression that Harry couldn't quite name. It wasn't the predatory interest he'd learned to recognize from his uncle. It wasn't the studied blankness teachers sometimes put on when they decided not to see something. It was something closer to recognition. Like a man who has been waiting a long time for a train and has finally heard the whistle. Harry looked away first, because he'd learned early that meeting that kind of gaze directly made adults uncomfortable, and uncomfortable adults were unpredictable adults. He noticed the bird almost immediately after. It was perched on a golden stand just behind Dumbledore's chair, a bird unlike anything Harry had ever seen, not that he'd seen much in the way of extraordinary birds, but he felt quite confident this one was unprecedented. It was roughly the size of a swan, but where a swan was all cold elegance, this bird burned. Red and gold, flame-colored, with tail feathers that didn't quite hold still, flickering at their edges as though perpetually on the verge of catching light. Its eyes were amber. Old. Absurdly old, Harry thought, older than the stones of the castle, which were already very old indeed. A phoenix. He didn't know how he knew. He just did. The same way he'd known, his entire childhood, that certain things were true even when no one had told him, the way he'd known his parents hadn't died in a car crash, the way he'd known the snake at the zoo hadn't been trying to escape so much as trying to talk. There was a certainty in him about the bird that bypassed his brain entirely and lived somewhere deeper, somewhere below thought. The phoenix was looking at him too. Harry felt it, a warmth, like standing near a fire but without the heat, more like the memory of warmth, and then Professor McGonagall was putting a battered old hat on a stool and everyone's attention swung towards it and a rip at the brim opened like a mouth and the thing sang. Harry listened. Around him, first years rustled and shifted. Hermione mouthed something to herself, either a word she didn't recognize or one she was committing to memory, he couldn't tell. Ron stood with his arms folded, looking like someone who had heard this story before but was willing to let it play out. The hat finished. People applauded. Abbott, Hannah, Hufflepuff. Harry stood in the middle of the nervous cluster of first years and breathed steadily and watched the sorting and tried not to think about what it would mean if the hat looked at everything inside him and found nothing worth sorting at all. He was approximately 2 names away from Potter when the warmth came back. Not subtle this time. Not a suggestion of warmth. It hit him between the shoulder blades like a hand, firm and deliberate, and he turned his head before he'd consciously decided to, because every self-preservation instinct he'd built in 11 years at the Dursleys was screaming that something was moving toward him and he needed to know what. The phoenix had left its perch. It had left its perch behind the headmaster's chair, which was on the staff table, which was at the far end of the great hall, and it was flying the full length of the room with its wings spread wide and silent, and every single student it passed over turned to stare as the candlelight caught and multiplied in its feathers and threw burning copper reflections across the faces below. No one spoke. The whole room went through a collective sharp intake of breath and held it. The phoenix landed on Harry's shoulder. Harry went absolutely still. He didn't think, what do I do, or what does this mean, or is this going to hurt? There was no room for any of that. What happened instead was that the bird folded its wings with a sound like falling ash, and settled its weight against the side of his neck, and sang, one single note, barely 3 seconds long, quiet enough that only Harry and the students within 6 feet of him could have heard it, and Harry felt it land somewhere in the center of his chest and stay there. Not a note so much as a key. Like something that had always been locked had just opened. His scar didn't hurt. He'd expected it to, expected something to hurt, because good things in his experience tended to come with a hidden price, but there was nothing. No pain. Just the warmth, and the song, and the sense of something vast and ancient settling itself deliberately into the space beside him, saying, I see you, I choose you, that's enough. He raised one hand slowly and touched the bird's wing. Harry, Ron Weasley said beside him, in a voice stripped of everything except pure disbelieving awe. Mate. That's, yeah, Harry said. That's Dumbledore's, yeah. It flew to you and, Ron, Harry said quietly. I know. The fire started 3 seconds later. Not gradually. Not a smolder or a warm glow building into something larger. It was immediate, a burst of phoenix fire that erupted from the bird on Harry's shoulder and went straight up, and every candle in the great hall flared at once in response, and the enchanted sky ceiling blazed gold for one blinding second, and then the fire hit the stone above them and 33 blocks of the ceiling detonated in a chain reaction from one end of the room to the other, not crumbling, not falling, burning away, the stone dissolving in phoenix fire like paper in a furnace, leaving behind perfect square gaps through which the actual night sky above the castle was suddenly, shockingly visible. Screaming. Chaos. Half the students dove under their tables. Several teachers were on their feet. Harry stood exactly where he was because the fire hadn't touched him, it had passed around him, close enough to feel like sunlight on every inch of his skin, warm and absolutely harmless, and he stood in the middle of the shrieking great hall with a phoenix on his shoulder and looked up through the holes in the ceiling at the real stars above. Then the fire died. The hall was silent for a long, aching moment. Through the 33 gaps in the enchanted ceiling, each roughly 3 feet square, the night sky was visible. But there was something else. Harry had to look twice to be sure, and then he was sure. The gaps weren't random. They weren't where the fire had happened to eat through. They formed a pattern, stars against the real night sky visible through them, yes, but also marks on the edges of each burned gap, carved into the exposed stone, glowing faintly with the last remnants of phoenix fire. Lines connecting them. A map. A constellation map. Built into the ceiling of the Great Hall of Hogwarts, invisible for however many decades it had been there, waiting for phoenix fire to burn away the stone above it. Harry looked at Dumbledore. The old man had stood when the fire erupted, every teacher had, but where Professor McGonagall's face was sheet white with shock and Professor Quirrell had knocked his chair backward stumbling to his feet and even Snape had half drawn his wand, Dumbledore was standing perfectly still. His wand was not drawn. His face was not the face of a man encountering a surprise. Harry had grown up reading adult faces for information they didn't intend to give. He was very good at it. And what he saw on Dumbledore's face in that moment, in the 3 seconds before the man composed himself into the warm, benevolent expression of a reassuring headmaster, was not surprise. It was relief. He knew, Harry thought. The certainty was cold and clean and quiet, the way useful certainties tended to be. He knew this was here. He was waiting for it. "My goodness," Dumbledore said, and his voice was perfectly warm and perfectly unruffled, filling the hall with the ease of someone who had spent decades being the calmest person in any room. "Well, I believe we can safely say that is a first. Please, everyone, no one is hurt. Please return to your seats. Fawkes, if you would be so kind." The Phoenix, Fawkes, turned his head and looked directly at Dumbledore. It was the look a person gives another person when they have just been asked to do something they have already decided not to do. Then Fawkes tucked his head briefly against Harry's cheek, a gesture so deliberate and so oddly human that 3 first years near Harry made small involuntary sounds, and stayed exactly where he was. Dumbledore looked at this for a moment. Something moved across his expression too quickly for Harry to catch it. "Yes," the headmaster said, quietly, mostly to himself. "Quite right." The sorting resumed. What else could it do? McGonagall, who Harry was rapidly developing enormous respect for, retrieved the list from where it had been knocked to the floor and began reading names again with the focused composure of someone who had decided that the structural integrity of her dignity was more important than the structural integrity of the ceiling. Students crept back to their benches. The whispered chaos became a background roar of "Did you see and what does it mean and is that a map?" that the teachers made no real effort to silence, because some moments are simply beyond containing. Longbottom, Neville went to Gryffindor, nearly in tears of relief. Malfoy, Draco, a blonde boy who had introduced himself on the train with the confidence of someone who had never once been told he might be wrong about anything, went to Slytherin, and looked satisfied, and then looked across the hall at Harry with the Phoenix on his shoulder and for just a moment the satisfaction flickered into something less certain. Patil, Parvati. Perks, Sally Ann. Potter, Harry. The whisper that went around the hall was like wine through high grass, instantaneous, complete, moving in one direction. Harry walked to the stool with Fawkes on his shoulder. The Phoenix's talons were warm through his robes. He sat and McGonagall, who had been aiming the sorting hat at his head, paused for a fraction of a second, clearly uncertain about the logistics of placing a hat on a head that already had a phoenix on the attached shoulder. Then she placed it firmly, the way she clearly intended to continue placing hats for the rest of the evening regardless of what birds were involved. The inside of the hat was very dark and smelled of old cloth. "Well," said a voice inside his head, dry and ancient and genuinely amused. "This is new." Harry waited. "I've sorted children with wands, children with tempers, children carrying their parents' ambitions like stones around their necks. Never had one come to me with a phoenix bond still forming. Do you know what that means, boy? What she's chosen to anchor herself to you?" "No," Harry thought. "Honest. Good. You've more ambition than you know, more courage than you need, more loyalty than anyone has ever been able to use, and a mind like a lock that nobody has ever bothered to give a key to. Extraordinary combination. You'd do well anywhere, but there's really only one house where you'd become exactly what you're meant to become rather than a version of it. Then put me there." A pause. And then, was it possible for a hat to feel surprised? The rip at the brim opened wide and the hat shouted, "Gryffindor." The Gryffindor table exploded. Harry pulled the hat off, handed it to McGonagall, who accepted it with a nod that managed to convey both welcome and the sense that any further Phoenix-related incidents would be met with firm disapproval, and walked to the red and gold table where people were making room and Percy Weasley was announcing loudly that he was a prefect and would show Harry around, and the twins, Fred and George, Ron had mentioned them 17 times on the train, were already shouting things Harry couldn't quite catch over the noise. He sat down. Fawkes settled his wings and looked around the Gryffindor table with the expression of someone who had arrived somewhere and intended to stay. Ron dropped into the seat beside him, newly sorted, beaming. "Brilliant," he said, and clearly meant it entirely. They're going to talk about that for 50 years. "They'll talk about the ceiling," Harry said. "They'll talk about you." Harry looked up at the 33 holes in the enchanted sky. He could see the constellation map's markings from here, still faintly lit, and he thought about Dumbledore's face, about that relief, not surprise, relief, and said nothing. The feast appeared. He ate. He made conversation. He answered Fred and George's cheerful interrogation about the phoenix. Does it just sit there? Does it sing? Does it burn things? Has it burned anything else since the ceiling? Do you think it would burn Snape if you asked it nicely, with honest answers and occasional helpings of mashed potato? Hermione, sorted into Gryffindor 6 names ahead of him, sat across the table and kept looking at Harry with an expression he'd already catalogued. "I've figured something out and I'm deciding whether to tell you." She told him at the end of the feast, when the plates had emptied and the noise had finally reached a decibel that made private conversation possible. "I memorized it," she said. Harry raised his eyebrows. "The map. On the ceiling." She pulled a folded piece of parchment from her robes. She had parchment on her, at a feast, which Harry found simultaneously odd and completely predictable, and spread it on the table, and he could see that in the chaos of the sorting she had been working on a rough diagram of where the 33 holes were, sketched quickly and from memory but with startling accuracy. "I paid attention when everyone else was panicking. Look, it's not a random star map. The layout matches the castle's floor plan. See these 7 marks?" She tapped 7 dots on her diagram, each at the intersection of connecting lines. "They're nodes. Like a circuit. And they're inside the castle, not above it." Harry studied the diagram. Fawkes tilted his head and looked at it too. "How do you know they're inside the castle?" Harry asked. "Because 2 of them are below the Great Hall floor level based on the angle of the lines. And one," she tapped a mark near the top of her diagram, "one is at the exact position of the 3rd floor corridor that McGonagall specifically told us not to go near." Ron, who had been pretending not to listen while eating an enormously large piece of treacle tart, set down his fork. "The forbidden corridor. The one with the very painful death." "Yes," Hermione said. "Exactly that one. Harry folded the parchment and put it in his own pocket. Hermione opened her mouth. He looked at her. She closed it again, then said, very reasonably, I do want that back. I know, he said. Thank you. She looked at him for a moment and then looked at Fawkes, who made a small sound, not quite a note, not quite a word, but warm in the way that fires on winter evenings are warm, the comfortable inescapable kind. He chose you, she said, and it wasn't a question, and it wasn't the starstruck wonder that everyone else had been expressing. It was more careful than that. More interested. Not for a reason we can see yet. We'll find the reason, Harry said. Ron picked up his treacle tart again. Brilliant, he said for the second time that evening. But he said it the way you say something when you mean it slightly differently to how you meant it the first time, not awe now, but something more settled. Something like a decision being made. The prefects led them out of the great hall and up the moving staircases, and Harry paid close attention to the route despite Percy Weasley's monologue about the prefect system and the Gryffindor common room password, because paying attention was a habit too old to break, and because at one landing he caught a glimpse through a high window of the third-floor corridor, just a glimpse, a long dark passage lit by a single torch, and nothing about it looked remarkable except for the way even that brief glimpse made the scar on his forehead prickle once, warm and sharp, and Fawkes pressed his head against Harry's ear and the prickle faded. The common room was red and gold and warm, full of squashy chairs and a fire that needed no tending, and after the portrait stared at Harry's phoenix for 60 seconds with various degrees of amazement and decided they had seen stranger things, several of them were quite old portraits and had clearly developed impressive tolerances, the common room settled into the familiar business of a new school year. Older students finding each other, first years mapping the geography of who was who. Percy directing everyone to the appropriate dormitories with the focused joy of a man who considered a functioning dormitory system a moral good. Harry's dormitory had 5 beds, which would hold him, Ron, Neville Longbottom, Dean Thomas, and Seamus Finnegan. Seamus was cheerfully telling what sounded like a rehearsed story about his own magical history. Neville was setting Trevor the Toad carefully in a tank that hadn't been in his trunk 2 minutes ago, which Harry suspected meant magic worked even when you weren't paying attention to it, which was a nice thought. Dean had pinned a poster of West Ham on the wall already. Harry sat on the edge of his bed. Fawkes, who had been on his shoulder since the Great Hall, stepped from his shoulder to the bedpost, curled his tail feathers around the carved wood, and settled into a posture that suggested both watchfulness and contentment, like a lighthouse lamp that was also, somehow, taking a nap. Ron dropped onto the bed next to Harry's and stared up at the ceiling. Okay, he said. Real question. Can he go back to Dumbledore if you tell him to? Or is this a permanent thing? Harry looked at Fawkes. Fawkes looked back at him with one amber eye. I think it's permanent, Harry said. Right, Ron said. So Dumbledore's without his phoenix. Seems like it. And the ceiling of the Great Hall has 33 holes in it. And there's apparently a star map up there that Hermione thinks connects to a corridor where something terrible is hidden. Harry said nothing. Ron turned his head on the pillow and looked at Harry directly. He had that look again, the one Harry had filed away during the feast, the I notice people look. You're not surprised, are you? About any of it? You were watching Dumbledore's face. Harry thought about the blue eyes. The relief. The settled composure of a man watching something he'd been waiting for arrive at last. He knew, Harry said. About the map. He's known it was there for years, I think. Maybe he put it there. Ron was quiet for a moment. That's either really good news or really bad news. Yeah. Harry lay back on the bed and stared up at the actual ceiling of the dormitory, which was a regular ceiling with no maps hidden in it. I haven't worked out which yet. He would, he thought. He'd work it out the way he'd always worked things out at the Dursleys, not by asking for help he wasn't going to get, not by waiting for someone to explain it, but by paying attention until the picture assembled itself from the pieces. He was good at pieces. He was good at staying quiet in rooms and watching what people's faces did when they thought no one was watching. And he had Hermione's diagram in his pocket, and a phoenix on his bedpost, and a mystery built into the bones of this castle that someone, the headmaster, maybe, the one with the glacier blue eyes who had watched Harry walk into the great hall with the particular recognition of someone who had expected him, had been waiting a very long time to be solved. The fire in the dormitory grate burned low. Neville's toad made a satisfied sound. Seamus finished his story to his own apparent approval and fell asleep mid-sentence. Dean Thomas's West Ham poster rustled in a draught from the window. Harry lay awake. He was thinking about the Sorting Hat's words, a mind like a lock that nobody has ever bothered to give a key to, and about Fawkes's song landing in his chest like something opening, and about the 33 gaps in a ceiling nobody was supposed to look at too closely, and about the fact that Quirrell, the stammering defense against the dark arts teacher who'd smelled of garlic and flinched at unexpected sounds, had been on his feet and withdrawn faster than anyone else in the room when the fire hit, and that his first instinct hadn't been to look at Harry the way everyone else had. His first instinct had been to look at the ceiling. At the map. As though he'd known to look there. As though he too had been waiting for something to be revealed. Worth remembering, Harry thought again. Fawkes sang 2 notes into the dark, so quiet only Harry heard them, and they were warm and steady, and they said, in the way that fire says things without words, yes. Keep thinking. You're already asking the right questions. Harry closed his eyes. Outside the tower window, the September stars burned the same as they always had over Scotland, over Hogwarts, over the ancient dark of the lake below. They'd been there before the castle and they'd be there after, and they neither knew nor cared about the map that matched their pattern, burned into stone by fire that had just chosen an 11-year-old boy with messy hair in his dead mother's eyes and a lightning bolt scar that sometimes prickled at the right questions. But the phoenix on the bedpost knew. And it had chosen this boy not because of his mother's eyes or his lightning bolt scar or the expectation of 100 dead witches and wizards who had decided a prophecy was more important than a person. It had chosen him because when Fawkes had looked across the full length of the great hall at the small figure standing in the cluster of nervous first years, the boy who had gone still instead of panicking, the boy who had lifted his hand slowly and carefully to touch a wing that could have set him alight, the boy who had stood in the middle of 33 blocks of burning stone and looked up instead of down, Fawkes had seen something that he had not seen in a very long time. Not the chosen one. Not the boy who lived. Just a boy who was paying attention. The fire in the grate burned down to embers and then to red light and then to a warm dark, and Harry Potter slept his first night at Hogwarts with gold and red feathers 2 feet from his head, and the world, which had been building to this particular night for a decade, took a long, slow breath. Chapter 2, the first node 3 days into term, Harry had a schedule, a route through the castle that avoided the particular staircase that tried to redirect you into the dungeons every other Tuesday, and a working theory about why the trophy room on the 3rd floor felt wrong. The schedule was courtesy of McGonagall. The staircase avoidance was courtesy of Fred and George Weasley, who had delivered the information along with a small hand-drawn map of what they called genuinely hostile architecture with the casual expertise of people who had been conducting field research for 4 years. The theory about the trophy room was entirely his own, assembled from 3 things: the prickling of his scar when he walked past the door on his way to Charms, Hermione's diagram folded in his breast pocket, and the way Fawkes went very still every time they passed that particular stretch of corridor, the way a compass needle goes still when it has found north. One of Hermione's 7 nodes was in the trophy room. Or below it. Or through it. She'd been careful to say the lines on the ceiling map weren't necessarily marking a precise location so much as a direction, like an arrow that points towards something without specifying how far away it is. Harry thought about that a lot. Classes, it turned out, were fascinating. Not in the way Dudley had made school sound, which was grey and perfunctory and something to be survived before you could go home and watch television, but in a way that every lesson kept expanding like a room that turned out to have more doors than you'd first counted. Professor Flitwick stood on a stack of books to see over his lectern and made a quill dance in the air and looked genuinely delighted by its trajectory, and the delight was contagious. Even potions, where Professor Snape had looked at Harry on the first day with an expression that belonged on a man who has found something unpleasant growing in his garden, was interesting in the way that complex systems are always interesting once you stop worrying about whether you're impressing the person teaching them. Snape had tried. He'd called on Harry in the first lesson, rapid-fire questions about aconite and bezoars and the difference between a monkshood potion and wolfsbane, which were apparently the same thing, and Harry had answered every one of them clearly because he had read every textbook on the Hogwarts list twice on the train and once before, because reading was what you did when you didn't have friends and the local library felt safer than home. Snape's eyes had narrowed and he hadn't called on Harry again that lesson, which Harry recognized as a different kind of notice. Not impressed. Re-evaluating. Also worth remembering. Fawkes came to every class. This had caused a 15-minute delay in Transfiguration on the second day when McGonagall had attempted to establish whether there was a school policy on phoenixes in classrooms and discovered there was not, because in 400 years of Hogwarts history no one had apparently thought to write one. She had looked at Fawkes, who looked back at her with complete amber dignity. She had looked at Harry. She had said, crisply, "He stays on your shoulder. He does not touch any of my animals. He does not breathe fire near any of my materials. Are we clear?" Harry had said yes. Fawkes had said nothing, which McGonagall seemed to accept as sufficient. After that, Fawkes was just there. Within 2 days the other Gryffindor first years had mostly stopped staring. Within 3 days Neville was talking to him during breakfast like you'd talk to a cat you'd decided to be friends with. It was only in other classes, with students from other houses, that Harry still saw it, the heads turning, the whispers, the Hufflepuffs who stared openly and the Ravenclaws who tried not to but did anyway and the Slytherins who had been thoroughly instructed by Draco Malfoy not to look impressed and managed about 40% compliance on a good day. Quirrell was the most interesting of the teachers. He was interesting in the way that a closed box with a faint ticking sound is interesting, not because of what it showed you but because of what it was careful not to. He stammered. His robes smelled medicinal, something beneath the garlic that Harry associated with old wounds rather than current ones. He was technically a competent teacher, he knew the material, he delivered it correctly, but there was something performative about his nervousness, the way there's something performative about the way a very good actor plays a minor character. A good minor character performance is slightly too complete. The details are slightly too deliberate. Quirrell's stammer arrived in all the expected places, but never in the unexpected ones. On the 4th day of term, Quirrell paused his lesson to cough, a soft, convincing cough, and fumbled with his wand, and in the moment of fumbling his eyes went over the heads of the class to the middle distance, and they were sharp. Just for a second. Utterly sharp and calculating, and then the fumble resolved and the stammer returned and the lesson moved on. Harry was the only one who'd been looking at his face instead of his wand. He didn't mention it to Ron and Hermione. Not yet. He filed it. The first real conversation with Hermione about the map happened on Wednesday night in the common room, after the other first years had gone to bed and the fire was down to a comfortable low and Ron was drowsing in an armchair with a chocolate frog card balanced on his chest, occasionally murmuring his opinions about the famous witches and wizard series into the middle distance. Hermione spread her diagram on the hearth rug and Harry sat cross-legged across from her. Fawkes stepped off his shoulder onto the hearth rug and lowered his head to look at the diagram with the focused air of a very bright animal who understood that the paper mattered even if the markings on it were human language. "I've been trying to match the positions to the castle layout," Hermione said, keeping her voice low. She'd replaced her original quick sketch with a more precise version, drawn carefully in ink with measurements in the margins. "The Great Hall is here. The nodes fall at," she tapped each one. "Trophy room. A point below the dungeons. The 3rd floor corridor, that's the one we already knew about. A point near the East Tower. The library. Somewhere beneath the Quidditch pitch, I think. And the 7th one is," she tapped the last mark, "odd. It doesn't map to anywhere obvious. It could be underground. Below the lake, maybe, or below the foundations. The 7th is the deepest," Harry said. She looked up. How do you know that? He gestured at the diagram. The connecting lines. They're not all equal length. The deeper nodes have shorter lines connecting to each other, tighter formation. Closer together. Like they're converging on something central rather than spreading out from it. She studied the diagram. Her eyebrows rose fractionally. You're right. She looked slightly annoyed that she hadn't noticed it herself and slightly pleased to be talking to someone who had. So the seventh node is the core. The others feed it. Or were fed from it. Harry thought about this. Something drew from all seven. Or filled them. A magical system, Hermione said immediately. She was already reaching for the 3 books she'd carried down from her dormitory, because Hermione Granger did not attend late-night map analysis sessions without reference materials. Layered. Old. The castle's foundations would have been set with intention. There's a whole field of study called architectural enchantment. It's in Hogwarts, a history. The chapter on Salazar Slytherin's contributions to the physical structure mentions load-bearing magic, which is magic woven directly into stone rather than cast onto a surface. Hermione, Harry said. She stopped. We need to see one, he said. Not just theorize. We need to actually look at one of the nodes. She held the pause of someone who had been about to say but that would mean going places we're not supposed to go and had then privately weighed that against the pull of genuine discovery and found the discovery winning by a considerable margin. The trophy room, she said. It's the closest. And it's not explicitly forbidden. He looked at her. Not like the third-floor corridor. Going to the third-floor corridor would be very ill-advised at this stage, she said primly. Then, after a half-second, she added, at this stage, in a slightly different tone of voice. Ron's chocolate frog card slid off his chest and he jerked awake, looked at both of them, looked at the diagram on the hearth rug, and said with the serene practicality of someone who'd grown up with Fred and George Weasley, "When are we going?" Harry looked at him. "You were asleep." "I was resting and thinking," Ron said. "When are we going?" "Friday night. After hours." Harry folded the diagram and looked at Fawkes. "Can you not light anything on fire?" Fawkes regarded him with the deeply patient expression of someone being asked a question they consider beneath their dignity to answer. "I'll take that as a yes," Harry said. Friday arrived through 2 days of classes that Harry attended with half his attention and used the other half to case the routes, timings, and patrol patterns of the castle. Mrs. Norris, the caretaker's cat, moved through the ground floor on a schedule that was either random or so complex it appeared random. Filch himself favored the second and third floors between 10 and midnight. After midnight the castle settled into a particular quiet that felt less like absence and more like holding its breath. He also spent those 2 days watching the trophy room door. Students passed it all day. First years on the way to Charms. Third years on the way back from wherever third years went on Thursday afternoons. The door was never locked, he'd checked, casually, not stopping, just brushing his fingers against the handle in passing. Open. Closed but open. The room was used for detention, he'd been told. There were trophies that needed polishing and the punishment was to polish them, but not this early in the year, not before anyone had done anything sufficiently bad. And every time Harry passed it, the scar prickled. Not painfully. More like a tooth that had been sensitive to cold for so long you'd started to think of the sensation as information rather than complaint. Fawkes went still. Every time. Friday night, 11 o'clock. Harry and Ron were under Ron's older brother Charlie's old invisibility cloak. Harry had been considerably startled when Ron had produced it, and Ron had explained that Charlie had left it behind during a visit 2 years ago and had never asked for it back, and if he hadn't missed it in 2 years he probably didn't need it. Hermione, who was small enough and slightly more comfortable with the ethics of rule-breaking when the rules in question didn't cover the specific situation, had fit herself against Harry's left side. Fawkes rode Harry's shoulder under the cloak, which made the cloak glow very faintly gold if you were paying attention, which at 11 on a Friday night, in an empty corridor, no one was. The trophy room door opened without a sound. Inside, glass cases. Hundreds of them, lit by a low ambient magical light that came from the walls rather than any torch or lamp, everything glinting quietly, cups, shields, medals, plaques, small framed certificates from competitions and tournaments that stretched back centuries. The smell was old and slightly metallic. Harry breathed it in and waited for his eyes to adjust fully. His scar prickled and didn't stop this time. "Here," he said softly. "Where?" Hermione was already scanning, her eyes moving methodically across the room in sections, the way she did everything. "Middle of the room." Harry moved toward it. He wasn't sure how he knew, it was the same certainty that had told him the bird was a phoenix, the same instinct that lived below rational thought. He stepped past a cabinet full of Quidditch trophies and stopped in the center of the room and looked down. The floor was stone. Plain flagstone, indistinguishable from every other flagstone in the castle, square edges and a slightly lighter shade of gray that might have been age or might have been the light. But where Harry was standing, Fawkes made a sound, that single-note sound, the key sound, the one from the sorting, and the air moved. Not wind. There were no windows. But the air moved, a slow circulation that rose from the floor directly below Harry's feet with a warmth that had nothing to do with the ambient temperature of the room, and Hermione sucked in a sharp breath beside him because she felt it too. Ron crouched and put his palm flat on the flagstone. Then he pulled his hand back and looked at it. "It's warm," he said. "The stone. It's warmer than it should be." Hermione dropped beside him immediately. She pressed both palms flat, spreading her fingers the way she did when she was trying to gather as much data as possible at once. "Significantly warmer," she said. She pressed harder, as if more pressure would tell her more. "And, there's something else. It feels depleted. Like, you know when you pick up a battery and you can just tell it's dead even before you put it in anything?" Harry crouched too. He put one hand on the stone and felt the warmth and felt, underneath it, the depletion she meant, a hollowness, like a cup that had been drained and never refilled, still holding its shape but missing its substance. The magic here had been drawn down to nothing. Not used up naturally. Drained. There was a difference. He couldn't have explained how he knew the difference, only that Fawkes's reaction confirmed it. The phoenix was looking at the floor with an expression that, on a human, would have meant grief. "Someone took from this," Harry said. "Took what?" Ron said. "Whatever it was storing." Harry stood. The whole system, the 7 nodes. They were full of something once. And something drained them. "When?" Hermione said. "Not recently." He looked around the room, the trophies, the certificates, the long careful history of a school measuring itself in achievements and dates. A long time ago. But not very long. He wasn't sure where the qualification came from. Just that it was right. 50 years, some part of him said. Give or take. Not centuries. Decades. Tom Marvolo Riddle, Hermione said suddenly. They both looked at her. She was standing in front of one of the glass cases, pointing at a small plaque on a shield. Her finger hovered just short of the glass. Special Award for Services to the School. Tom Marvolo Riddle. 1943, who is Tom Riddle? Ron said, the way you say a name you don't recognize, testing the shape of it. Harry looked at the plaque. The scar on his forehead prickled. Fawkes, on his shoulder, made a sound Harry hadn't heard from him before, low, almost below the range of hearing, more vibration than note. It was the sound, Harry thought distantly, that fire makes when it is burning something it does not want to be burning. He had a feeling he knew exactly who Tom Marvolo Riddle was. He had a feeling that if you rearranged the letters of that name, and he was already doing it in his head, he'd always been good at puzzles, you would arrive somewhere familiar. Somewhere he'd been told about all his life, in the carefully constructed half-truths of two very ordinary people who had wanted an extraordinary boy to be unremarkable. He didn't say it out loud. Not yet. He filed it away in the same mental drawer as Quirrell's sharp eyes and Dumbledore's expression of relief and the warmth of the drained stone underfoot. "Someone important," Harry said. "We'll find out who." They stayed another 10 minutes. Hermione made notes with a self-inking quill she'd apparently been carrying in her sleeve. Ron found 2 more trophy plaques he thought might be relevant based on dates from the 1940s, a Quidditch Cup, 1942, nothing notable in the winner's name, and a school debate award from 1944. Harry mostly stood in the center of the room and let the warmth and the absence beneath it settle into his understanding. The node was drained. But it wasn't dead. It was hollow, not destroyed. There was still structure here, still the framework of whatever had made this a node in the first place. Something had drawn from it deliberately. Something powerful. And then the thing that had drawn from it had, what? Left? Died? Hidden? He knew the answer. He knew it the way he'd known everything else tonight, below thought, in the basement of instinct, where 11 years of surviving the Dursleys had built a very sensitive set of detectors for the shape of things you weren't supposed to know. Voldemort. Tom Riddle. Whatever was left of him, wherever it was now. He had built something using these nodes. Or he had drained them to build something. And whatever he'd built, we should go, Ron said softly. Mrs. Norris's schedule was apparently mapped precisely enough in his head that he could feel the edges of it. She does a sweep of this corridor around midnight. We've got 8 minutes. They went. The return trip across the castle was quiet, all 3 of them processing privately. Ron moved through dark corridors with the ease of someone who had grown up navigating a house full of older siblings and had developed good spatial instincts. Hermione walked with her notes pressed to her chest, her lips moving slightly. Harry moved with Fawkes warm and still on his shoulder, turning over pieces, fitting them against each other. At the foot of the Gryffindor Tower staircase, Hermione stopped. "Harry," she said, quiet enough that only the 2 of them heard it, "Ron a step ahead. The drain on that node. If all 7 nodes are like that, then something used all 7 of them," Harry said. "Something that needed a very large amount of stored magic. All at once, or close to it." She held his gaze. She was very smart and she was not quite there yet, but she could see the shape of where there was, and the shape was making her uncomfortable. What requires that much stored magic? Harry thought about the question. He looked at Fawkes. Fawkes looked back at him, steady and amber and ancient, and the low sound he'd made in front of Tom Riddle's plaque still lived in the air between them. "Something that should have been impossible," Harry said. Hermione stared at him. Then she turned and went up the stairs, very precise, very fast, and Harry heard her go all the way up to the girls' dormitory without stopping. Ron was looking at Harry from the top of the first landing. "You know, don't you?" he said. Not accusing. Just certain. "I have a strong suspicion," Harry said. "Are you going to tell us?" "When I'm sure." Harry started up the stairs. "And when I've figured out what we're supposed to do about it." Ron considered this. "My mum has a saying about that. She says the problem with knowing something important is that then you're responsible for it." "Your mum sounds very wise," Harry said. "Terrifying, mostly," Ron said. "But yeah. Basically the same thing." Saturday morning was Quidditch trials for the older years. First years weren't eligible, which Harry had been told firmly by Oliver Wood, the Gryffindor captain, who had the energy of someone who considered Quidditch to be slightly more important than oxygen. Harry watched from the ground anyway, because watching people who were good at something physical was interesting in the way that all competence was interesting, and because from the stands near the changing rooms he had a direct line of sight to the edge of the Forbidden Forest and could see, at the right angle, the approximate location of what Hermione's diagram placed as the 7th node. Below the lake. Or below the foundations. Underground either way, and deep. Fawkes was restless on his shoulder, which was unusual. He'd been still and settled for most of the week, warm and watchful but not agitated. Now he kept spreading one wing and folding it, spread and fold, the way a cat flicks its tail when something nearby has its attention. Harry scanned the Quidditch pitch perimeter and found Quirrell. The defense professor was standing at the edge of the stands at the far end, watching the trials with the expression of someone who was not watching the trials. His gaze kept moving to the forest. His wand hand was in his robe pocket, and his profile from here showed a jaw that wasn't trembling, wasn't nervous, was absolutely composed. Harry stood up from the bench. He walked the long way around the stands, casual, stopping to watch would shout at a third year about broom grip. He stopped to tie a shoe that didn't need tying. He moved steadily in a wide arc that gradually shortened the distance between himself and Quirrell without being a straight line toward him. When he was 15 feet away, Quirrell turned. Not surprised. His eyes went directly to Harry, skipping all the people in between, which meant he'd known Harry was moving toward him well before Harry had gotten close. His face rearranged into the familiar anxious mask, the small smile, the slight hunch of the shoulders, the readiness to stammer, but it assembled itself slightly slower than it should have, one beat behind, and Harry saw the gap. "P. Potter," Quirrell said. Enjoying the trials?" "Watching," Harry said. He stopped a comfortable conversational distance away and looked at Quirrell with the same steady attention he gave everything. "Not challenging. Not performing innocence either. Just looking. Do you fly, Professor?" Well, I did, once. I'm afraid heights have become," Quirrell gestured vaguely and let the stammer carry the sentence to its conclusion. "The forest looks different from up here," Harry said pleasantly. "Better angle." A pause. "Fractional." Fawkes made no sound, no movement, but Harry felt him go taut on his shoulder, not the way a bird tenses before flight, but the way a fire burns hotter when something flammable comes close. "I suppose it does," Quirrell said. "Have you explored much of the grounds?" Harry said. "In the year you've been here?" The stammer evaporated for exactly 2 seconds. Quirrell's eyes sharpened and met Harry's with the full force of whatever intelligence lived behind the nervous performance, and what Harry saw there was not the evil he'd been expecting, not the blank malice of a fairy tale villain, but something more complicated and more interesting. Hunger. A very focused, very old hunger. And below it, in the dark below the hunger, something else. Something that was not Quirrell. Then the mask was back. "Oh, I don't get out much," Quirrell said. "Rather a homebody, I'm afraid." He smiled the anxious smile. "You should watch wood more closely, Potter. They say you're built for a seeker, though of course first years can't try out." "I know," Harry said. He smiled back, easy, genuine, giving nothing. "Have a good morning, Professor." He walked away, hands in his pockets, casual. Behind him he felt Quirrell's gaze like a second sun, concentrated, calculating, and he kept his pace steady and relaxed and did not look back, because the most important thing he'd learned from Fawkes in the past 5 days was that you didn't have to prove to the fire that you were warm. You just had to be warm and let the fire know. Fawkes pressed his beak against Harry's ear as he walked, gentle and deliberate, and the warmth in Harry's chest burned a degree hotter. He found Ron and Hermione at the base of the stands. Ron had somehow acquired a hot pasty and was eating it with the contentment of someone whose whole morning was satisfactory. Hermione looked up from a book that Harry could see was not on their school list and raised her eyebrows at his expression. "What happened?" she said. "Quirrell is watching the forest from the pitch," Harry said. "He knew which direction I was coming from before I got close." He looked at Ron. "He's not what he's presenting as." Ron's pasty paused midway to his mouth. He lowered it slowly. "That's not great, given that he's teaching us defense." "No," Harry agreed. "What is he, then?" Hermione said, and she said it the way she said most things, not as a dramatic question but as a problem to be resolved, a gap in her information that she intended to fill. "I'm not sure of all of it yet," Harry said. "But he's interested in the forest. The 7th node's direction." He paused. "And there's something else." Something that isn't entirely him. Hermione set down her book. Meaning what? Harry thought about the eyes. The hunger. The thing in the dark below the hunger that was not Quirrell. Meaning we need to find out more about Voldemort, he said, before he finds out more about us. Neither Ron nor Hermione spoke immediately. Ron had grown up in a wizarding family and had had the name drilled out of him by years of parental anxiety. He flinched at it, slightly, the way you flinch at a sudden noise even when you know it's not dangerous. Hermione had read about Voldemort in 6 books already this week, Harry suspected, but reading about something and hearing someone say it plainly were different things. Okay, Ron said, after a moment. Right. Okay. He took a decisive bite of his pasty and chewed it. Library, then. Library, Harry confirmed. I'll get us a table at the back, Hermione said, already moving, book tucked under her arm. Away from the windows. And I'm going to need the restricted section eventually, but we can start with the regular stacks, Hermione, Harry said. She stopped. Good work this week, he said. The map. The notes. The trophy room. He meant it simply, without performance, because she had done good work and someone should say so. She looked at him for a second with an expression that he recognized distantly as the face of someone who didn't get told that very often by peers and didn't quite know what to do with it. Then she straightened up and said, "The 7th node is the key. I'm certain of it," and walked toward the castle with her chin level and her stride purposeful. Ron watched her go and then looked at Harry. "You're good with people," he said. "I noticed them," Harry said. "That's all." "No," Ron said thoughtfully, biting his pasty again. "That's not all. Noticing and caring what you notice are different things. You care what you notice." He looked at Fawkes, who was watching Hermione's retreating figure with apparent approval. "I think that's why he chose you." Harry looked at the phoenix. The amber eyes turned to him. The warmth in his chest was steady and constant now, as natural as a heartbeat. "She'd figured out that Tom Riddle's name is an anagram, by the way," Ron said as they started walking. "Last night, after she went upstairs. She knocked on the dormitory wall, weird system, but it works, and said he's an heir of Slytherin, and then I heard her moving around for another hour before she went quiet." Harry looked at him. "How does she know?" "She'd already looked it up," Ron said simply. "She'd looked it up before we went to the trophy room. She was waiting to see if we'd work it out ourselves first." He shrugged. "I think she's testing us." Harry considered this. "Is that annoying?" "Little bit," Ron admitted. "But also kind of fair." He opened the castle door, held it for Harry and Fawkes both, and added, "To be honest, I think she was a bit lonely before us." "So was I," Harry said. "So was I," Ron said, in a tone that closed the subject gently and opened a different one without either of them having to name it. They went to the library. Hermione had indeed taken the corner table, stacked 4 books already, and acquired what appeared to be a 3rd book from an entirely different section in the time it had taken them to cross the grounds. She looked up when they sat down. "Heir of Slytherin," she said. "We know," Harry said. "Oh," she said, and very nearly smiled. "Good." Outside the library window, the grounds of Hogwarts stretched to the forest, and the forest held its secrets in the dark between its trees, and somewhere below the foundations of the oldest part of the castle, a 7th node sat at the center of a drained and hollow map, and waited, and did not quite die, because some things are built to outlast the force that emptied them. And in the library, 3 children who had chosen each other over the course of 5 improbable days spread their notes across a table and went to work. Fawkes sat on the back of Harry's chair and his tail feathers didn't quite touch the wood, and the air around him smelled of clean fire and open spaces, and the candles in the library burned slightly warmer than they usually did, and no one who glanced at the corner table could have told you exactly why the 3 students sitting there looked, despite being 11 years old and knowing perhaps a quarter of what they needed to know, completely and genuinely unafraid. Chapter 3, The shape of an enemy. October arrived the way Scottish autumn always does, without apology, all at once, the temperature dropping 15 degrees overnight and the wind off the lake acquiring a personal quality, as though it had decided to make the student specifically aware of its opinions. The trees at the forest's edge went copper and gold, and the sky most mornings was the particular shade of gray that makes everything beneath it look either very beautiful or very exposed, depending on your mood. Harry was in a good mood. He had been in a good mood for 3 weeks, which was notable given that the last time he'd maintained a good mood for 3 consecutive weeks he'd been approximately 5 years old and had not yet understood the full scope of his living arrangements. The difference now was that things were happening. Things were moving. Every day added a piece to the picture, and the picture was ugly in places but it was real, and Harry had always been able to handle real better than he could handle the particular suffocating unreality of Privet Drive, where the most frightening thing was how thoroughly everyone pretended that everything was normal. Nothing here was normal. It was wonderful. He'd found Tom Riddle. Not physically, not the man, not whatever was left of him, but in the library, across 3 separate Saturdays and 2 weekday evenings, he and Hermione and Ron had built a thorough picture. Hermione had found the name first, the anagram, I am Lord Voldemort, assembled from the letters with the quiet satisfaction of someone completing a cipher. Ron had found the family history, the Gaunts, the line of Slytherin, a family that had collapsed into nothing by the mid-20th century through a combination of inbreeding, poverty, and the particular self-destructive pride of people who valued lineage over survival. Harry had found the gap. The gap was in all the histories. Every account of Voldemort's rise and fall in 1981 described what came after, the defeat, the disappearance, the long decade of uneasy peace, and described what came before, the terror, the killings, the allegiances, but nothing described what came between. The period from roughly 1943 to 1970 existed in the histories as a series of footnotes about a brilliant and dangerous young man, and then the footnotes stopped, and the next chapter started a decade later with war. What Tom Riddle had done with his 20s and 30s, where he had gone, what he had built or broken or become, the histories didn't say. They're not just vague, Hermione had said, spreading 3 books side by side to compare. Look. The language changes. Everything before 1943 is specific, dates, names, events. Everything after the school years is, she gestured at the text. Fog, Ron said. He was right. The prose went soft. The historians seemed to lose confidence in their own sentences. Qualifiers multiplied. It is believed. It has been suggested. Some accounts indicate. The fog of someone riding around a hole they don't want to name. Someone made sure there wasn't a record, Harry said. Or made sure the records were lost. Or made sure the people who'd have been the records were. He stopped. Gone, Ron said quietly. The 3 of them had sat with that for a moment. What they did have, assembled from fragments across 7 different texts, was this: Tom Riddle had gone looking for something after school. He had been a collector, of knowledge, of power, of followers, of pieces of himself, though that last one Harry couldn't quite articulate yet, only feel the shape of it in the hollow nodes and the draining of something that should have been permanent. He had changed his name. He had acquired the reputation of an unstoppable force not because he was unkillable but because he had done something to make himself unkillable, and whatever that something was, it had required the kind of magic that didn't leave clean records. Dark magic, Hermione had said, with the tone of someone identifying the genus of a dangerous plant, precise, careful, not afraid of the word. But not just dark. Old. The kind of magic that the books won't describe directly. The kind that requires something, Harry said. An exchange. What kind of exchange? Ron said. Harry thought about the hollow in the trophy room floor. The warmth and the absence. Something given and something taken, and the shape of what remained. Something you can't take back, he said. He hadn't been able to push further than that with the library's standard stacks, and the restricted section required a teacher's note, and asking a teacher for access to the restricted section while you were investigating what Voldemort had done to make himself immortal seemed like a conversation that needed very careful staging. He'd filed it. He was good at filing things until the right moment to use them. In the meantime, the nodes were on his mind constantly. He'd been back to the trophy room twice alone, at different hours, just standing on the flagstone and feeling the hollow warmth. Fawkes always reacted the same way, that low, grieving vibration. The second time, Harry had pressed both hands flat on the stone the way Hermione had and tried to feel further in, and something had happened that he hadn't told either of them yet because he was still working out what to make of it. The stone had responded. Not dramatically. Not fire or light or anything you could put in a textbook. It had simply recognized him. The way a locked door recognizes the right key, a slight give, a shift in pressure. The hollow warmth had moved toward his hands fractionally, like a dying fire leaning toward fresh air. And Fawkes had made the key sound, the opening sound, the one from the sorting, and the flagstone under Harry's palms had been, for 3 seconds, slightly more warm than depleted, as though the bond between Harry and Fawkes was doing something to the node that mere human touch couldn't. He was still thinking about what that meant when the first Quidditch lesson of his life was announced. Oliver Wood had come to breakfast 3 Tuesdays into October with the energy of a man who had found his purpose, and the purpose was specifically Harry Potter. He delivered a 10-minute explanation of the seeker position accompanied by a hand-drawn diagram that he unrolled on the table between the toast rack and the marmalade, and Harry had listened with genuine interest, and by the end of it Wood had looked at him with the expression of someone who'd been expecting to have to sell something and had unexpectedly found a willing buyer. Thursday morning, Wood had said. 6 o'clock. I know it's early, but McGonagall says, 6 is fine, Harry said. Wood had blinked. You don't want to negotiate? The last seeker always argued about the time, Wood, Harry said. 6 is fine. I'll be there. Wood had rolled up his diagram with a satisfied snap. Harry genuinely did not mind 6 in the morning. The Dursleys had cured him of any attachment to sleeping late. He'd been up before the household his whole life, cooking breakfast and moving quietly through a house that didn't want him, and what that had given him, along with all the things it had taken, was a native ease with the early dark, the empty house silence, the time before the world started expecting things from you. Thursday at 6, the pitch was cold and misted, the goals barely visible at their far ends. Wood was there already, of course, vibrating with preparatory energy. He'd brought a wooden crate and a Nimbus 2000 and a snitch he'd borrowed from Madame Hooch, and he handed Harry the broom with the reverence of a man handing over something holy. Harry had never flown before. This was a fact he'd disclosed to no one since Wood had recruited him, and he did not disclose it now. He got on the broom, held it the way Wood showed him, and kicked off. The ground dropped away and the cold air hit him like a wave and his stomach lurched once, hard, and then something clicked. Something that might have been instinct or might have been the bone-deep relief of being somewhere that his family history couldn't follow him, somewhere that was just physics and reflex and the very pure problem of moving through 3 dimensions at speed. Fawkes, who had lifted off Harry's shoulder as he kicked off, rose beside him on his own wings, and they were briefly, simply, 2 flying things in the cold October air. He chased the snitch for 40 minutes and caught it 6 times. Wood's coaching had devolved by the 4th catch into a series of sounds that weren't quite words. By the 6th catch he was sitting on his own broom 20 feet up and staring at Harry with the expression of a man confronting something that had broken his frame of reference. Harry landed, caught Fawkes back on his shoulder, and looked at him. That was all right. Harry said. All right, Wood said faintly. Then, you've never flown before. First time, Harry confirmed. Right, Wood said. He was quiet for a moment, recalibrating. Then the captain surfaced and overrode the bewilderment and he said, with enormous decisiveness, Thursdays and Sundays. 7 to 9. We're going to the Cup this year. Fine with me, Harry said. He was walking back to the castle, Fawkes warm on his shoulder, the snitch still doing a slow circle in his jacket pocket where he'd absently put it after the last catch, when he saw Quirrell. The professor was at the edge of the pitch, near the equipment shed, and he wasn't watching Harry. He was looking at the ground. Not at the grass, at the ground, with a precise, focused attention that Harry had seen before, that morning 3 weeks ago when he'd looked at the trophy room flagstone and felt it recognize him. Quirrell was feeling for something with his foot, slow and methodical, moving in a small grid pattern. Looking for a node. He hadn't found the right location yet, he was searching rather than standing, which meant he wasn't responding to a signal the way Harry and Fawkes were. He was working from the map. Which meant he'd memorized Hermione's diagram somehow, or had his own version of it, or had always had it. He'd been at the sorting. He'd looked at the ceiling with those sharp eyes, not at Harry. He'd had the map since September 1st. Harry stood at the edge of the pitch and watched Quirrell search the ground for 60 seconds. He felt, in order, a cold clarity, a wave of something that wasn't quite anger but was adjacent to it, and then a decision. He walked toward him. Quirrell heard him, or felt him, or Fawkes's proximity set off some alarm in whatever shared his body, and turned around with the anxious smile already assembled. P. Potter. Early morning practice. Wood's idea, Harry said easily. He stopped 4 feet away and looked at the ground around Quirrell's feet with no particular expression. Dropped my glove on the way out, he said. Have you seen one? Brown leather. I'm afraid not, Quirrell said. Harry looked up from the ground to Quirrell's face with the same absence of expression. What are you looking for, Professor? The pause was 4 beats long. In those 4 beats, 3 things happened. Quirrell's face did something complicated under the mask, Fawkes went still and hot on Harry's shoulder, and the air between them changed temperature in a way that had nothing to do with the October morning. It got colder, and the cold had a direction, it was coming from Quirrell. Not from the weather. Just enjoying the grounds, Quirrell said. The stammer was back fully, complete, airtight. Beautiful at this time of year. It is, Harry agreed. He smiled pleasantly. The nodes are roughly 8 feet to your left, I think. You're searching a bit wide. The mask dropped. Not fully, not the whole performance, not all at once, but enough. The eyes went sharp and flat and extremely still, and the mouth closed without the anxious expression around it, and for 3 seconds Harry saw the face of the thing that wore Quirrell's body the way Quirrell wore his robes, as a covering, not a self. It was not afraid of Harry. Harry registered this clearly. It was not afraid of Harry, and it had no reason to be afraid of an 11-year-old. What it was, in those 3 seconds, was assessing. Calculating range and capability and threat level with the cold efficiency of something very old that had survived by never miscalculating a situation. Fawkes made no sound. But he spread his wings. Not wide, not dramatically, not the full wingspan. Just enough. A few inches on each side of Harry's shoulders, gold and red in the early morning gray, and the light that came off those feathers was not reflected morning light. It was its own light. It said something in the language of very old things that had no equivalent in words, and what it said was, simply, I am here. I have been here before. I have burned things far older and darker than you. The calculating flatness in what was not Quirrell's eyes flickered. Just once. And what moved through it in that flicker was not fear, exactly, but the memory of fear, the echo of a very specific moment from a very long time ago when something had looked at a phoenix and understood for the first time that there are forces in the world that cannot be bargained with and cannot be threatened and cannot be consumed. Quirrell's face reassembled. The stammer returned. Dear me, I don't know what you mean, he said, and turned, and walked back toward the castle at the pace of a man who was not hurrying and not fleeing and was doing both. Harry watched him go. His pulse was completely steady. He hadn't been frightened, he'd felt Fawkes the whole time like a second heartbeat, constant and burning, and there was nothing in the world with a phoenix on your shoulder and that warmth in your chest that could make your pulse jump. He'd filed that away too. Whatever lived in Quirrell recognized Fawkes, and recognized him specifically, and did not like the recognition. He went back to the castle, ate breakfast, told Ron and Hermione what had happened in a flat, factual way he told things when the facts were sufficient without emphasis. Hermione's quill stopped moving. Ron put down his toast. He was searching the pitch, Hermione said. Near the Forbidden Forest edge, Harry said. The direction the seventh node lines point. He's trying to find them, Ron said. All of them? The seventh, specifically, I think. The others are mapped already, he's had the ceiling map since the sorting. But the seventh doesn't have a clean castle location to anchor to. It's below the foundations. Harry was eating porridge. He ate porridge with the same focused efficiency he applied to most things, because he had spent enough years being hungry that eating well when food was available was non-negotiable. He'll figure out the location eventually. He's systematic. What does he want with the nodes? Hermione said, and the question wasn't rhetorical, she already had a theory, he could tell, and she was checking it against his. Same thing Voldemort wanted with them, Harry said. Something stored in them. Something big enough to be worth whatever he did to drain them in the first place. But they're empty, Ron said. Now they are, Harry said. They weren't always. He looked at Hermione. What do you fill a node with? If you're deliberately storing something. She was already turning this over. He could see it, the precise, rapid machinery of her thinking visible in the micro-expressions that crossed her face when she was working. Power, she said. Raw magical power, drawn from the ley lines the castle sits on. Like a reservoir. You'd fill it over time, draw it from the ambient magic of the earth, and then use it all at once for something that required more power than any individual witch or wizard could produce. Or, Harry said, something you couldn't do yourself. Something that needed the power to be external. At arm's length. Hermione went very still. Harry, she said carefully. Are you describing a ritual? I don't know yet, he said honestly. I'm describing a shape. The details are still unclear. There are rituals, she said, her voice gone precise and technical the way it did when she was nervous and compensating with information, that require power to be stored rather than directly wielded because the caster can't maintain the working and survive it simultaneously. You'd fill the nodes, walk away, and trigger the release remotely. She paused. There's one category of ritual where that makes particular sense. Where you'd need the power to be external. What category? Ron said, and Harry could tell from his voice that he'd already guessed and didn't want to have guessed correctly. Immortality magic, Hermione said quietly. Rituals designed to bind a soul to continued existence. They require catastrophic amounts of power, more than any living person can hold and release simultaneously. You'd need a reservoir. You'd need, she gestured at the diagram between them, 7 nodes. All of them draining at once, channeled into a single point. The great hall was full of the noise of breakfast around them. Pumpkin juice being poured. Arguments about Quidditch. Someone dropping a plate at the Hufflepuff table and getting applause. He used the castle's own magic, Harry said. Hogwarts's ley lines. Its foundation power. He drained 7 nodes that had probably been building up for centuries and used them all at once he stopped. To make himself impossible to kill, Ron said flatly. To make himself impossible to fully die, Harry corrected, because this was the distinction that mattered, the one he'd been reaching toward for 3 weeks. There's a difference. Voldemort didn't survive my mother's curse because he was unkillable. He survived it because even when his body was destroyed, something of him, some piece, was anchored. Couldn't dissolve. Couldn't move on. He looked at his porridge. He's in Quirrell, he said. Sharing his body. Which means whatever he anchored himself to isn't enough to sustain a full existence. He's borrowing. Borrowing Quirrell's body, Hermione said. Borrowing it, Harry said. He needs something more. The Philosopher's Stone, probably. He said it plainly, because they'd found references to the stone in 2 of the library books, and because it had been obvious from the first week that the heavily guarded third-floor corridor and the vault that had been emptied at Gringotts on the same day Harry visited it added up to exactly one thing. Flamel's stone is in the castle. In the third-floor corridor. Guarded. And Quirrell, Voldemort, wants it, Ron said. Wants a new body, Harry said. Wants to be whole again. The stone gets him there. The 3 of them sat with the full picture for a moment. It wasn't a comfortable picture. It had a mass to it, a weight that pressed against the chest, the understanding that a piece of the darkest wizard in a century was living 30 feet away in a purple turban and teaching them to counter hinkypunks. Then Ron said, with the steady practicality that Harry was coming to love about him, "So what do we do?" And Harry said, "We learn. We prepare. And we find out what's actually guarding the stone before he does, so that if, when, this comes to a head, we're not surprised. And we tell Dumbledore?" Hermione said. It wasn't quite a question. Harry thought about Dumbledore's face at the sorting. The relief. The knowing. "Dumbledore already knows Voldemort is here," he said. "He left the stone in the castle. He knows Quirrell is compromised, I think. He's watching." He paused. "What I don't know yet is whether he's watching to help or watching to see what happens." Hermione looked at him for a long time. "Those are very different things." "I know," Harry said. He finished his porridge. The next 3 weeks had the quality of a held breath. Classes continued. Harry's map of the castle's rhythms grew more detailed. He knew where every teacher was at most hours, knew when the corridors were empty, knew the particular schedule of Peeves' haunting rounds and Filch's patrol routes. He went up to the astronomy tower twice on clear nights and looked at the sky and matched the stars overhead to Hermione's diagram. He flew every Thursday and Sunday. He started sleeping with the snitch under his pillow and occasionally reached for it in the dark and felt it flutter in his palm, automatic and satisfied. He watched Quirrell. This was the main occupation of the period. Not obsessively, not in a way that consumed his classes or his time with Ron and Hermione, but constantly, the way you keep an eye on weather when you're planning to be outdoors. Quirrell moved through the castle with a performance of nervousness that Harry could now see through completely, and what he saw through it was patient, intelligent, meticulous. Every third day Quirrell found a reason to be near one of the node locations. He never touched anything. He was gathering information about their current state, Harry thought. Checking the depletion levels. Looking for something that was still there to be found. 3 days before Halloween, Harry went back to the trophy room alone at 2 in the morning and sat on the flagstone for an hour with both palms pressed flat. Fawkes sat beside him on the floor, wings folded, making no sound. Harry worked. He'd been thinking about what happened the last time, the stone recognizing him, the warmth moving toward his hands, and he'd been thinking about the feel of magic in his lessons, the way it responded to intention more than technique. Flitwick kept saying feel the intention behind the word, and Hermione kept noting the theory in her textbooks, and Harry kept nodding along, but what he actually knew about magical intention was instinctive rather than theoretical. He felt it the way he felt the wind direction on a broom, automatically, physically, without verbal processing. He felt the node now. Beneath his palms, the hollow warmth, the shape of something drained. He followed the warmth down, the way you follow a river upstream, past the flagstone and into the stone below and further, into the ley line architecture that underlay the castle's foundations, and he felt, vast. Old. The slow, enormous patience of bedrock. And within the depletion, a thread. Not empty. Not full, nothing like full, but not entirely empty. A thread of something remaining, the way there's always one match left in a box you think is empty. He didn't try to use it. He didn't try to fill it. He just found it, and held the awareness of it, and breathed steadily, and Fawkes beside him made the warmth between them expand gently outward the way a fire spreads to nearby wood. The thread pulsed. Once. Like a heartbeat. Harry opened his eyes. There's something left, he told Fawkes quietly. Not much. But something. He didn't drain it completely, couldn't, or didn't need to. He thought about this. Or couldn't, because the last fraction resists. The deepest part. The part that's woven into the castle's bones, not just stored there. Fawkes looked at him. The amber eyes were very steady. The seventh node, Harry said. The core one. Underground. If that one still has something in it, he stopped. Because the next thought was large enough to stop for. If the seventh node, the core, was still partially full, if Voldemort had drained the outer six to power his immortality ritual but the seventh had resisted, retained its last fraction, then the nodes weren't just historical evidence. They were still active. Still connected. And if something could replenish that last fraction, reawaken the thread, he's looking for the stone to get a body, Harry said slowly. But if the nodes could be refilled, Fawkes made a sharp, short sound. Not a warning, something more immediate. Alert. Harry was on his feet in the same second, moving to the side of the door, back against the wall, hand not on a wand because he hadn't practiced much wandless yet and the wand was in his pocket at an awkward angle, he filed that for immediate correction, and listened. Footsteps. In the corridor. Slow, deliberate, pausing. Then they stopped outside the trophy room. The door didn't open. The footsteps were Quirrell's. Harry knew his gait by now, the slight unevenness in the left foot, the careful quiet of a man who was pretending to be less physically capable than he was. They were Quirrell's footsteps and they had stopped directly outside the trophy room door. Harry stood in the dark and breathed and waited. Fawkes was invisible in the dark except for the faint warmth of his feathers. He made no sound. The air in the room felt different, not colder, this time, but thick, the way air gets before a storm, the way a room feels when something very old and very attentive is very nearby. 20 seconds. 30. The footsteps moved on. Harry breathed out. He waited another 10 minutes before he left, because whoever had been in a hurry had already left and whoever wasn't in a hurry was going to go at their own pace regardless. He checked the corridor. Empty. He walked back to Gryffindor Tower at a pace that was unhurried and unfrightened, because he wasn't either, and Fawkes rode his shoulder the whole way with his wings slightly spread, just slightly, the way he'd spread them on the Quidditch pitch. In the dormitory, Ron was awake. He'd been awake, Harry could tell, the particular quality of someone who had been lying still rather than sleeping, waiting. Well? Ron said, keeping his voice low. Quirrell was in the corridor, Harry said. Outside the trophy room. Didn't come in. Did he know you were there? Harry thought about it. About the stopped footsteps. The deliberateness. Yes, he said. I think he did. Ron was quiet for a moment. He's testing you, he said. Harry looked at him. He knew you were there and he didn't come in, Ron said. He could have. If you were just an 11-year-old in the wrong place at the wrong time, he'd have either ignored it or come in to catch you out. He didn't. He stopped. Ron propped himself up on one elbow, speaking with the calm thoughtfulness of someone who'd grown up with 5 older siblings and had developed a thorough understanding of calculated behavior. He's deciding what you are. He's not sure yet whether you're a threat or just interesting. Harry sat on his bed. Fawkes stepped to the bedpost. What do I do about that? Harry said, though he thought he already knew. Show him what you are before he decides for himself, Ron said. On your terms. Not his. He lay back down. That's what Fred always says about Slytherins, anyway. Don't let them set the terms of the match. Fred's wisdom, Harry said. Fred's wisdom, Ron agreed. It's about 60% reliable but that's better than nothing. Harry lay back. He stared at the ceiling. He thought about nodes and threads and stone that had resisted being fully drained, that had kept its deepest fraction even when everything else was taken. He thought about the shape of a soul bound to continued existence. He thought about the Philosopher's Stone, one floor above the most dangerous thing in the castle, guarded by a series of obstacles that a person with enough intelligence and preparation could navigate. He thought about Dumbledore, who had put the stone there deliberately, who had watched the ceiling of the great hall burn open with relief. "What are you waiting for me to do?" Harry thought toward the old headmaster who was presumably asleep in his tower 300 feet away. "What do you think this is going to look like?" No answer. Of course no answer. Dumbledore gave answers only under very controlled conditions, Harry had already learned, in lessons where he appeared to answer questions while actually redirecting them, in casual encounters where warmth substituted for information. He was a man who kept his own counsel with an expertise that Harry recognized, because he'd learned the same skill from necessity and Dumbledore appeared to have learned it from choice. That was the difference between them, Harry thought. They might end up wanting similar things, operating from similar instincts, even trusting each other eventually. But Harry had learned to keep his own counsel because the people around him couldn't be trusted with what he knew. Dumbledore kept his own counsel because he didn't trust other people to handle what he knew the way he thought it should be handled. One of those was armor. The other was control. He wasn't going to be controlled. He didn't say it dramatically, even internally, he just knew it, quiet and clean and certain, the way Fawkes had known to fly the length of the Great Hall on September 1st. It wasn't defiance. It was simpler than defiance. It was the first thing about himself he'd learned to be sure of. He closed his eyes. Fawkes sang 2 notes into the dark, and the second one was different from the first, not the key sound, not the opening lock warmth, but something that resolved. Something that sounded like the word ready would sound if music could be a word. "Yeah," Harry said, very quietly. "Me too." Halloween was 3 days away, and he didn't know yet what it would bring, but the held breath of October was almost over and his pulse was steady and Fawkes was on the bedpost and the thread in the node below the trophy room was still there, still beating, faint as a candle in a very large and very dark room, but burning. Chapter 4, Everything Dumbledore Built. Halloween arrived with a troll. Harry had been expecting something. The held breath quality of October had been building toward a release, the way pressure builds in a weather system before the storm makes its decision, and he'd spent the 3 days between his midnight session in the trophy room and Halloween in a state of heightened attention that he was careful not to let show. He ate normally. He attended classes. He caught the snitch for Wood on Sunday morning in under 4 minutes, which made Wood briefly religious about something. He helped Neville repot a plant that had escaped its container in herbology and was making determined progress toward the greenhouse door. He waited. Hermione had not come to the Halloween feast. That was the first thing. He'd noticed it during the first course, her absence from the Gryffindor table, and filed it alongside the absence of Quirrell, who had also not appeared at the staff table, and the fact that Fawkes had spent all morning with his wings spread at full extension, which he only did when something needed his full attention. By the time Professor Quirrell burst through the doors of the Great Hall mid-feast, turban askew and voice pitched to maximum trembling hysteria, shouting about a troll in the dungeons before collapsing in a convincing faint, Harry was already standing up. Ron was beside him. "Hermione," he said. "Bathroom," Harry said. "She doesn't know." They moved against the current of students being directed back to their dormitories by prefects and teachers, slipping through a side passage that Harry had mapped 2 weeks ago precisely because it ran counter to the main student flow routes, and they ran. Harry found the troll by sound, a rhythmic crashing that echoed off the second-floor stone and bounced in all directions, which made the source confusing until Fawkes oriented on his shoulder like a compass needle, heat spiking slightly left, and Harry adjusted course without breaking stride. The girls' bathroom. The crashing was the troll's club going through the cubicle walls, methodical and stupid, the troll working through them one by one. They got the door open and Harry saw the troll and saw Hermione against the far wall, back flat against the stone, white as the tile, bleeding from a cut above her eye where flying debris had caught her, very clearly alive and very clearly trying to stay that way by making herself as small as possible in the corner. Harry didn't hesitate. "Ron, it's legs," he said, and he was already moving, not toward the troll but sideways and forward simultaneously, angling for the troll's right side and moving fast enough that its instinct to track the moving thing would draw its attention away from Hermione. It worked. The troll turned. The club came around and Harry dropped under it and came up inside the swing's radius where the club couldn't reach him effectively and jammed his wand up and said Wingardium Leviosa with the full force of 5 weeks of Flitwick's classes behind it. The troll's own club went straight up out of its hand and came straight back down on its head. The troll sat down very heavily. Then it lay down, with the slow inevitability of a building being demolished, and the floor shook when it landed. Silence. Hermione stared at Harry from her corner. Ron stared at Harry from the door. Fawkes, who had lifted off Harry's shoulder when he'd gone into the crouch, settled back down now with an air of satisfied neatness. The troll on the floor was not dead, just profoundly unconscious, already snoring at a volume that competed with the crashing it had been making a moment ago. That was, Ron started. "Are you hurt?" Harry said to Hermione, already crossing toward her, looking at the cut above her eye. It's fine, it's just," she was shaking slightly, the precise controlled shaking of someone who had held it together under pressure and was now, with the pressure removed, allowing themselves exactly as much physical reaction as was physiologically unavoidable. She touched the cut. "It's not deep. You'll want Madame Pomfrey for that," Harry said. He looked at her steadily. "You're all right." She looked back at him. "You moved very fast," she said, with the faint surprised quality of someone updating an assessment. "Had to," he said simply. McGonagall arrived. Then Snape and Quirrell. Harry watched Quirrell's face in the doorway above the unconscious troll. The professor's eyes went directly to Harry, skipping the troll, skipping Hermione, finding Harry immediately with the focused attention of someone checking a variable. Harry looked back at him blandly, and Fawkes on his shoulder was warm and still, and whatever Quirrell was checking for, he didn't seem to find it, or didn't find the version of it he'd expected, and his face went carefully neutral. McGonagall was magnificent. She expressed her fury about the rule-breaking, said several very pointed things about irresponsibility and trolls and the general concept of moving toward danger, and then paused and said, crisply, that 5 points would be awarded to Gryffindor on this occasion and that she hoped never to speak of this matter again. Hermione, when McGonagall finished, said in a very small but very clear voice that it wasn't the boy's fault, she had gone looking for the troll herself because she thought she could handle it, which was categorically untrue but delivered with such conviction that even Harry, who had been there, briefly second-guessed his memory of events. McGonagall looked at her for a long moment with the expression of someone who knows they are being lied to and is deciding what to do about it. "Bed," she said. "All 3 of you. Now." That was Halloween. The next morning, Hermione sat down at the Gryffindor table beside Harry, put her breakfast plate next to his, unfolded her napkin with absolute composure, and didn't say anything about what had happened. Harry didn't either. Ron, after a brief internal debate visible in his face, also didn't. They ate breakfast together as though it were the 20th time rather than the first, with the particular comfortable ease of people who have survived something and arrived, wordlessly, at the decision to keep arriving at the same table from now on. It was different after that. Not dramatically, not announced, just the way things settle into a new arrangement when the arrangement is right. 2 weeks into November, Harry went to see Dumbledore. He'd been deciding when to do it since the first night of term, and the decision had finally resolved not from running out of patience but from having gathered enough. He knew about the nodes. He knew about Tom Riddle. He knew about Quirrell. He had Hermione's diagram, his own 3 weeks of tactile investigation in the trophy room, and the conversation about the thread, that surviving fraction, that he still hadn't fully solved. He had enough pieces that when Dumbledore inevitably offered him some portion of the truth, Harry would be able to measure it against what he already knew and identify exactly which parts were being withheld. He went alone, on a Wednesday evening, and he told Fawkes where he was going and Fawkes went with him, because of course he did. The stone gargoyle at the base of the headmaster's tower leapt aside without Harry needing to know the password, which might have been because of Fawkes or might have been because the castle had its own opinions about who deserved access to whom and had made a unilateral decision. Harry had been noticing that the castle occasionally did things like this when he was nearby, small adjustments and assists, a door opening a beat early, a torch brightening at the top of a dark stair, and he'd put it in the same category as the node recognizing his palms. The castle knew the bond. The circular office at the top of the stairs was extraordinary in the way that very old rooms crammed with the evidence of a very long life tend to be, not messy, not cluttered, but dense. Portraits of previous headmasters dozed in their frames. Glass instruments on silver stands tracked things Harry couldn't identify. Bookshelves covered 3 walls floor to ceiling with the particular organization of books that have been used rather than displayed. There was a desk, large and paper scattered, and behind it Dumbledore looked up from whatever he'd been writing and, just for a fraction of a second before the warmth came on like a lamp, his eyes did the same thing they'd done at the sorting. Not surprised. Calculating. "Harry," he said. "I've been wondering when you'd come." "You knew I would," Harry said. He sat in the chair across the desk without being invited, which Dumbledore watched with a faint expression that was either approval or amusement and might have been both. Fawkes stepped from Harry's shoulder to the arm of Harry's chair and turned to face Dumbledore with the composed dignity of someone returning to a place they used to live and declining to make it awkward. "Fawkes seems very settled," Dumbledore said, and his voice was warm but there was something underneath it, not grief, not quite, but the complex texture of a person who has accepted a loss that is also, in some sense, a completion. "He's been settled since the sorting," Harry said. He looked at the old man across the desk and said, without preamble, "You knew about the map." The pause was very brief, and then Dumbledore said, "Yes." Just that. No deflection, no twinkle, no gentle redirection towards something more comfortable. Just yes. And Harry appreciated it enough to give something back. "You put it there," Harry said. "I did," Dumbledore said. "Why?" Dumbledore set down his quill. He folded his hands on the desk with the settled air of a man who has been rehearsing a conversation and has arrived at it, finally, and is not relieved exactly, but ready. "How much have you worked out?" he said, and this was not deflection either, it was a genuine question, asked with what Harry had learned to recognize as Dumbledore's specific form of respect. He asked what you knew before telling you what you didn't, because he thought what you knew mattered. Harry told him. He told him about the trophy room and the depleted node and the warmth and the recognition. He told him about Hermione's diagram and the 7 locations and the convergence of the lines toward the deep 7th node. He told him about the remaining thread in the stone, that last fraction that hadn't been fully drained. He told him about Tom Riddle and the 1943 Service Award and the gap in the histories and the shape of a ritual that required catastrophic power and a reservoir that couldn't be personally wielded. He told him about Quirrell searching the pitch and Quirrell's sharp eyes at the sorting and the thing in Quirrell's eyes that was not Quirrell. He did not tell him about Quirrell outside the trophy room door. That he kept. He spoke without notes, without emphasis, in the flat factual way he described things that were complex and important. Dumbledore listened without interrupting once. When Harry stopped, the office was very quiet. A portrait in the corner, an old headmistress, white-haired, quick eyes, had stopped pretending to doze and was watching openly. Dumbledore was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "You are 11 years old." "Yes," Harry said. "What are Horcruxes?" The word landed in the room like a stone into still water. Dumbledore's face went through something that happened too fast and too deep to fully catalogue, shock, or the closest thing to shock that a man of his composure could display, which was a single arrested second in which everything went very still, and then his expression settled into something Harry hadn't seen on him before. Not the warm headmaster. Not the calculating strategist. Something older and quieter and genuinely moved. "Where did you encounter that word?" Dumbledore said carefully. "I didn't," Harry said. "I arrived at it. A ritual that requires catastrophic power and creates an anchor that survives physical death. Something stored in an external object. Woven into the soul." He met Dumbledore's eyes directly. Whatever he did to survive my mother's curse. Whatever piece of him is in Quirrell, borrowing his body because it doesn't have one of its own. Whatever he used the 7 nodes to create. He paused. It's a Horcrux. Or it's the process that creates one. Those are the same word. Dumbledore looked at Harry for a long time. Yes, he said quietly. They are the same word. Harry waited. Dumbledore stood and moved to the window. Outside, the November grounds were dark and rain-blurred, the lake a sheet of shaken pewter. His reflection looked at him from the glass and he looked back at it with the expression of a man reviewing a very long account of decisions made in his own name. "Sit with me a moment," he said, and moved to 2 chairs near the fire rather than back to the desk, and Harry moved with him because this was Dumbledore asking for something rather than offering it, and that was different and worth accommodating. "You understand," Dumbledore said, sitting, "that what I'm about to tell you is information I have shared with no one your age, and very few people of any age." "I understand," Harry said. "And you'll appreciate that I'm telling you now not because I think 11 is the right age to carry this," a slight, self-directed edge in his voice, "but because you have arrived at most of it independently, and completing your picture is more honest than allowing the gaps to mislead you." "I appreciate that," Harry said. He meant it. Dumbledore told him about Horcruxes. Not everything. Harry was aware, even as Dumbledore spoke, that there were edges, that the shape of the information had borders that the headmaster was navigating carefully. But the core of it, the splitting of a soul through murder, the anchoring of that fragment in an object, the catastrophic magical cost of the act, the way a person who had made a Horcrux could not fully die while the object survived. He told it without flinching from the ugliness of it, which Harry respected. He told it the way you tell someone a true thing, plainly. "How many did he make?" Harry said. "That," Dumbledore said carefully, "is something I am still working to determine." "More than one," Harry said. "Yes. Almost certainly more than one." Dumbledore looked at the fire. "The magic of a Horcrux is survivable once. To do it again, to split a soul that is already halved, requires a constitution that most human beings, even very dark ones, do not possess." Tom was not most human beings. 7 nodes, Harry said. Dumbledore turned to look at him. 7 nodes drained, Harry said. 7 pieces. The silence stretched between them like a bridge being tested. "That is a theory," Dumbledore said, very quietly, "that I have been reluctant to arrive at." "Because it's easier to address 1 or 2 than 7, Harry said. "Because," Dumbledore said, and the warmth in his voice had gone somewhere deeper and more complicated, "the implications of 7 Horcruxes for the person who must ultimately address them are," he stopped. "Significant," Harry said. "I was going to say devastating," Dumbledore said, and the word came out with the specific weight of something that had been held behind a door for a very long time. Harry looked at the fire. He let the word sit. Devastating. He turned it over in his mind, not performing consideration, actually considering, and then he said, "Tell me about the prophecy." Dumbledore's head turned. "I beg your pardon." "The prophecy," Harry said. "The one that made you put me with the Dursleys. The one that made you need me shaped a specific way, isolated, tested, aware of loss. The one that required me to arrive at Hogwarts already difficult to break." He looked at Dumbledore directly. "I know there is one. I've known since I was old enough to understand why Voldemort came for my family specifically. People don't build 9-year campaigns around a single infant without a reason. The reason is a prophecy." Dumbledore was very still. "You engineered the conditions," Harry said. Not accusing. Stating. "The Dursleys weren't an accident of placement, you chose them. Ordinary, magic ignorant, unkind. You needed me to grow up without knowing what I was, without being shaped by the wizarding world's expectations of me, without becoming the image of the boy who lived before I had any idea what that image required. You needed me hungry for something. Paying attention." He paused. You needed me to be exactly what I am. Dumbledore said nothing for a long time. The fire snapped. Fawkes, on the arm of Harry's chair, was utterly still. Yes, Dumbledore said at last. Just that. And it hit harder than any elaboration would have. Tell me what it says, Harry said. Dumbledore looked at him with an expression that had moved beyond calculation and beyond warmth into something rawer than either. The expression of a man confronting the distance between what he intended and what he did. The one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord approaches, born to those who have thrice defied him, born as the seventh month dies, and the Dark Lord will mark him as his equal, but he will have power the Dark Lord knows not, and either must die at the hand of the other, for neither can live while the other survives. The fire crackled. Rain hit the windows. Power he knows not, Harry said. What power? That is, the question I have spent a decade trying to answer. You don't know, Harry said. I have theories, Dumbledore said. Love is the most, love, Harry said, not dismissively but carefully, the way he'd say any word he was checking the weight of. My mother died for me. The protection she left, is real, Dumbledore said firmly. More real than most magic, because it chose freely given death over survival, and that choice writes itself into the world in ways that are very difficult to undo. It is why Voldemort cannot touch you without burning. He looked at Harry with something like apology. It is also why I placed you with your aunt. Blood protection. Her blood carries your mother's sacrifice. As long as you could call that house home, the protection held. Harry thought about Privet Drive. About home. About the specific irony of that word applied to a cupboard under a staircase. Held, he said. Past tense. You are here now, Dumbledore said simply. Hogwarts is your home now. The protection of the blood is, diminishing, with distance and time. It will not save you indefinitely. He met Harry's eyes. Which is why the Horcruxes must be resolved. Harry looked at him. All 7. Yes. And the prophecy says one of us has to kill the other, Harry said, and said it the way he said everything, plainly, because plainness was the only honest way to say a thing that large. Either I kill him, eventually, or he kills me. That is, yes. And you've been building toward that outcome, Harry said, for a decade. Setting the board. Putting the stone in the castle to draw him out. Putting me here. Waiting for Fawkes to make the choice you needed made. He looked at Fawkes. You needed him to bond with me because the note in the trophy room responded to me and Fawkes together. You needed the map revealed. You needed me to find it and start asking questions. He looked back at Dumbledore. The whole plan required a Phoenix bond. But you couldn't force Fawkes to choose. So you waited. Dumbledore's eyes were very bright. No, he said quietly. I could never force Fawkes to do anything. Did you know he would choose me? I hoped, Dumbledore said. There is a considerable distance between hoping and knowing, Harry. And if he hadn't? If I'd been sorted and the map had stayed hidden? Then I would have found another way, Dumbledore said. I always find another way. It is, a quality I have come to regard with some ambivalence. Harry was quiet for a moment. He looked at the fire. He was aware that he was angry, not the hot, useless kind, but the cold functional kind, the kind that doesn't need to be expressed because it's already been converted into something more useful. He was angry at the specific shape of what Dumbledore had done, using suffering as a tool. Using the Dursleys and the cupboard and the years of careful exclusion as an instrument to produce the right result. Doing it because the prophecy said it was necessary and because Dumbledore trusted his own judgment about necessity more than he trusted anyone else's. He was angry. He was also, with the same cold clarity, entirely capable of understanding why. That was the worst part. He understood. You're going to tell me, Harry said, that you're sorry. That if you could have found another way you would have. That the protection required the Dursleys specifically and that you chose the least harm available from a set of very bad options. Yes, Dumbledore said. All of that. And I'll tell you something else. He looked at Harry with an openness that Harry hadn't seen on him before, something that had the quality of a door left unlocked. I was wrong to keep you in the dark for as long as I intended to. I planned to tell you none of this until you were much older, much further through your education. You'd have been going into this blind. He paused. Fawkes made a different choice. And Fawkes has never been wrong about a person. He's testing that claim right now, Harry said. Something moved across Dumbledore's face that was almost, but not quite, a smile. I am aware. Harry stood up. He put his hands in his pockets. He looked down at the old man in the chair by the fire, the great Albus Dumbledore, architect of decades, most powerful wizard alive, who had built a plan around a child's misery and believed, probably correctly, that he had no better option, and he said, I'm not going to be your piece. Dumbledore looked up at him. No, he said. I don't believe you are. But I'll work with you, Harry said. On my terms. That means you tell me what you know when I ask. That means no more engineered conditions. That means you treat me as someone involved in this, not the subject of it. He met the blue eyes. Can you do that? Dumbledore was quiet for a long moment. The fire crackled. Fawkes stood on the chair arm and looked at the old man with that particular amber patience, unhurried, waiting. I can try, Dumbledore said. I find it very difficult to trust the outcome to anyone but myself. It is a significant flaw. I know, Harry said. I'm asking you to try anyway. Another silence. Longer this time. Then Dumbledore said, the stone is guarded by 7 obstacles. I designed them. I know all 7. The 7th is the Mirror of Erist. He held Harry's gaze. I'll tell you what the mirror shows and what it requires. You'll need to know it, I think, before this year is finished. Harry nodded. Dumbledore told him about the mirror. What it shows, the deepest desire of the person who stands before it. What Dumbledore had designed it to do with the stone, it would only give the stone to someone who wanted to find it but not use it. A protection that relied on intention rather than skill, which meant it was unbreakable by power or knowledge alone. Voldemort can't get it, Harry said. He wants to use it. He'd see himself whole and alive in the mirror and reach for that, and the stone would never materialize. Correct, Dumbledore said. And the person who finds the stone in the mirror must already have their deepest desire structured around something other than personal gain. He looked at Harry very carefully. Do you understand what I'm telling you? You're telling me what I'll see in the mirror, Harry said. When I get to it. I'm telling you what I believe you'll see, Dumbledore said. Yes. Harry thought about it. His deepest desire. Not the stone, not power, not Voldemort's defeat, those were objectives, goals, things wanted instrumentally. His deepest desire was simpler and older than any of that, worn smooth by years of carrying it, to not be alone. To be seen. To belong somewhere that wasn't borrowed. Fawkes sang one note. It landed in Harry's chest in the same place the first one had. I'll get the stone, Harry said. Dumbledore looked at him. The obstacles, I'll manage the obstacles, Harry said, not dismissively but certainly, the same certainty he had on a broom, the instinct that was below thought. I'll go when it's time. I'll know when it's time. He looked at Dumbledore. What I need from you is information about the other Horcruxes. Where they might be. What objects he might have used. Whatever your research has found. Dumbledore blinked. You're planning beyond the stone. The stone solves the immediate problem, Harry said. It doesn't solve the Horcruxes. He can't get a body without it, but the Horcruxes mean he can't be finished even if his current attempt fails. You and I both know that. He looked at the headmaster steadily. Unless we address all of them, we're just postponing. The portrait in the corner had completely abandoned the pretense of sleep. The white-haired headmistress was watching Harry with an expression that, he couldn't be sure, portraits were strange, looked very like respect. "You are," Dumbledore said slowly, "remarkable." "I'm paying attention," Harry said. It was the same thing he'd said to Ron, and it was still true, and it was still the most accurate description he had of what he did and why it worked. "Yes," Dumbledore said, and the word had a weight to it that said he understood there was a difference between what Harry claimed and what he was, but that he was also going to honor what Harry claimed. "I have theories about 2 of the Horcruxes. Possibly 3. He reached for his quill. "Sit down. This will take some time." "Good," Harry said, and sat back down. They talked for 2 hours. The fire burned low and Dumbledore fed it twice. He told Harry about his theories, cautious, evidenced, presented as theories with the intellectual honesty of a man who didn't like being wrong and compensated by being very careful about what he claimed to know. A diary, possibly, something from the school years, from the period around 1943, consistent with the kind of trophy a brilliant young man might create at the height of his power and his arrogance. Objects connected to the Hogwarts founders, given Tom Riddle's particular obsession with bloodline and legacy. A snake, possibly, dark magic lent itself to living vessels under certain conditions, and Voldemort's affinity for serpents was documented. And a 7th piece, the one that remained in Voldemort himself, the fragment that was his own soul's last anchor, which could not be addressed until everything else was. Harry listened and asked questions and Dumbledore answered them with the slightly dazed quality of a man who has been asked to share a weight he's been carrying alone and is surprised to find it's lighter than he thought. It was past midnight when Harry stood again. "The diary is the most immediate," Harry said. "If it's in the castle or accessible to anyone in the castle, Quirrell, if he finds it, it could be used to create something. Another anchor." He looked at Dumbledore. "It would be safest destroyed. Finding it will require," Dumbledore started. "Time," Harry said. "I know. After the stone." He looked at Fawkes, who stood from the chair arm to his shoulder in one smooth motion, deliberate as always. "Thank you," Harry said, to Dumbledore. He meant it without it being comfortable. Dumbledore looked at him. "Thank you," he said, and meant something different by it. Something that Harry understood had to do with years and plans and a relief that was not the relief of something going correctly but the relief of something being shared. Harry went to the door. He was halfway through it when Dumbledore said, "Harry." He turned. The old man was still in the chair by the fire, looking older than he had at the start of the conversation, the particular older of someone who has put something down that they've been carrying at a cost. "The years at your aunt and uncle's house," he said. "I am sorry. It was," he paused. "Not right. What I decided was necessary and what was right were not the same thing, and I have told myself for 10 years that they were. I don't think I'll tell myself that anymore." Harry looked at him for a moment. "Okay," he said. Not forgiveness, not dismissal, something in between, something that acknowledged the apology without making it the end of the story. "Don't do it again." He left. The staircase turned under him and deposited him in the corridor and he walked back through the castle in the deep November midnight, Fawkes on his shoulder, the conversation settling into him the way complex information settles, not all at once, gradually, finding its level. 7 Horcruxes. A prophecy that ended one way or another. A plan built around his suffering that had worked, at least in the sense that he was here and paying attention and exactly as difficult to break as Dumbledore had needed him to be. A phoenix that had chosen him. A stone to reach before Quirrell did. He came to the 7th floor corridor, took the turn toward Gryffindor Tower, and passed a door he'd walked past a dozen times without stopping. Tonight he stopped, because he felt it, the same tug as the trophy room, the same warmth and recognition, except this one was different. Not hollow. Not drained. Something else. The door handle was not locked. He opened it and looked in and found a large room full of broken furniture and various junk accumulated over several centuries, and in the middle of the room, half covered by a moth-eaten tapestry, a tall mirror in a heavy gold frame. The mirror of Eriste. He hadn't been looking for it. He'd been told about it an hour ago and here it was, and the castle was not subtle when it was making a point, so he stood in the doorway and looked at it and let his eyes find the inscription along the top. Eriste stra eru oit ube kafru oit onwosi. He read backwards without effort. I show not your face but your heart's desire. He didn't go in. He didn't cross to it. He looked at it from the doorway, across the room, and made sure that he understood what it was and what it did and what he would do when he stood before it in circumstances that were less controlled than this. Then he closed the door, because he was not ready yet and he knew he was not ready yet and knowing the difference was, he thought, the most important thing Dumbledore had told him all evening, not in words, but in the shape of the whole conversation. Ready mattered. Understanding mattered. Choosing your moment instead of being pushed to it mattered. He walked back to Gryffindor Tower. He gave the password. The fat lady, who had been asleep, opened with the grumpy dignity of a portrait disturbed after midnight. Ron was awake again, sitting up in the half-dark, and this time he looked less like someone waiting and more like someone who had known exactly when Harry would return and had timed his wakefulness accordingly. Well? Ron said. 7, Harry said, sitting on his bed, pulling off his shoes. Ron was quiet. Then, 7 Horcruxes. 7. The word filled the room and then settled, and Fawkes on the bedpost sang one long, quiet note that lasted 3 full seconds and then dissolved into the dark like smoke from a clean fire. Okay, Ron said. He lay back. So. We've got some work to do. Quite a lot, Harry agreed. Starting with the stone. Starting with the stone. And then after that, we hunt down fragments of a dark wizard's soul and a series of objects that are probably very well hidden and very well protected. More or less, Harry said. Right, Ron said, and pulled his blankets up, and was apparently done for the evening. Then, just before sleep pulled him under, he said very quietly, You know I'm not leaving, right? For any of this. Harry looked at the ceiling. I know, he said. Just making sure, Ron said. Go to sleep. Harry closed his eyes. Outside the tower window, the November grounds were rain-black and silent, and somewhere below the foundation stones of the oldest part of Hogwarts, the 7th node sat in the dark and pulsed its last surviving thread of ancient magic, patient as bedrock, waiting for what was coming. Everything Dumbledore had built was still standing. But Harry was inside it now, not subject to it, standing at the center of the plan with the plan's full weight visible and his eyes fully open, which was not what Dumbledore had intended and was exactly what was needed. He slept. Chapter 5, The Stone and the Song. The moment Harry knew it was time arrived on a Tuesday in June, between breakfast and charms, when he walked past the third-floor corridor and the door was open. Not broken open, not forced, just open, the way a door is open when someone has passed through it recently and not bothered to close it behind them, which meant either they hadn't expected anyone to follow or they didn't care. The torchlight from inside spilled into the corridor in a warm trapezoid on the stone floor, and the smell that came through was damp and animal and something else beneath that, something cold and purposeful that made the hair on Harry's arm stand up. Fawkes went rigid on his shoulder. Harry turned and found Ron and Hermione 12 feet behind him, both of them having stopped walking at the same moment he had. Ron was looking at the door. Hermione was looking at Harry. They'd been heading to Charms. They were going to be late for Charms. None of them mentioned Charms. Now. Ron said. Now, Harry said. Hermione had her bag on. She'd been carrying everything they'd identified as potentially useful for 3 weeks, because she was Hermione and preparation was not something she left to chance. Rope. Dittany. The diagram, though Harry had it memorized so thoroughly he could reconstruct it in the dark. A small bottle of something she'd brewed herself, which she described as potentially helpful in a fire-based obstacle and not elaborated on further. Her wand, which she held better now than she had in September, with the steady grip of someone who had stopped being frightened of what the wand could do and started being interested. Harry had his wand, his instincts, and Fawkes. Ron had his wand, his spatial intelligence, and the quality Harry had come to think of as his most underappreciated asset, the ability to stay completely calm when everything around him was not, which had nothing to do with not understanding the danger and everything to do with having decided, ahead of time, that the danger was acceptable. They went through the door. The first obstacle was the dog. Harry had known about the dog from Hagrid, 3 heads, enormous, stationed on the trapdoor, fiercely loyal to whoever had given it its assignment. What Hagrid hadn't mentioned, because Hagrid had a specific relationship with animals that involved trusting them to behave as friends rather than threats, was the sound the thing made. Not barking, all 3 heads were doing different things simultaneously, 2 of them growling at different pitches and 1 tracking movement with the focused attention of a hunting animal, and the combined effect was a wall of sound and intent that hit you physically when you opened the door. Harry opened the door and walked in. The dog's 3 heads swung toward him. 3 sets of eyes found him. The growling went up 2 registers and the temperature of the room seemed to drop several degrees, and behind Harry he heard Ron and Hermione come in and take positions on either side of the door, not retreating, just getting their feet under them, and in front of him the dog gathered itself. Fawkes sang. Not the key note, not the opening lock warmth. This was different, larger, more complex, the full resonance of a phoenix voice filling a stone room and doing something to the air that was less like music and more like weather. It went through the walls and through the floor and it went through 3 enormous canine skulls and into 3 very large and very simple brains and it said something in a register that was below human hearing but directly in the range of the oldest parts of the animal mind, and what it said was, sleep. The effect was not instant. It took about 8 seconds, which were the longest 8 seconds Harry had spent since the troll, each of them filled with the very concrete possibility that 1 or more of the dog's 3 heads would decide to be upset about being told to sleep before the instruction fully landed. But it landed. The growling dropped in stages, the tracking eye fogged, and then 3 heads went down in sequence, left, right, middle, and settled on 3 enormous paws and the room went quiet except for triple-tracked snoring that shook the trapdoor's edges. That was extraordinary, Hermione said, in the very specific tone she used for things that were extraordinary but that she had at least partially anticipated. Fawkes preened once, briefly, then oriented on the trapdoor. Harry pulled it open and jumped. The fall was further than he'd expected and the landing was soft, a mass of devil's snare that caught him immediately, thick ropes of it wrapping around his legs before he processed the impact. He felt it start to tighten and he didn't panic, because Devil's Snare responded to panic the way it responded to darkness, enthusiastically. He relaxed completely, which was its own kind of discipline, and said calmly upward, Devil's Snare. Light. Hermione, who had landed 2 feet away and had evidently also known this was coming, already had her wand producing a strong, warm light. The plants recoiled from it instantly, unwrapping from Harry's legs with the sulky speed of something that has been denied a meal. Ron dropped through the trapdoor and landed in the clearing the light had made, and they moved through the passage before the plants recovered their composure. The second obstacle was flying keys. The room was large and arched and filled with hundreds of winged keys, all of them moving in slow circles near the ceiling, and at the far end was a locked door, and broomsticks were leaning against the wall. Harry already knew which key to look for, old, large, with 1 bent wing from having been caught before and he found it in 11 seconds, because looking for a specific thing in a field of similar things was a version of finding a snitch and he had been practicing finding the snitch for 2 months. He was on a broom and had the key in his hand in 35 seconds total. The door opened. They moved through. The third obstacle was a giant chess set. Harry surveyed it and turned to Ron, who was already looking at the board with the particular focused expression he had when he was reading a situation spatially, not excited, not overwhelmed, just reading it the way you read a text in a language you're fluent in. I need to play this, Ron said. Yes, Harry said. I'll need a knight, Ron said, already walking toward the board, already thinking several moves ahead. Take Bishop's position, both of you. Don't move unless I tell you. He played the chess set. Harry watched and thought about Quirrell somewhere in the passage ahead, and about the stone, and about the mirror, and Ron played white and moved his pieces with the cold decisive authority of someone who had been playing wizard chess since he was 5 years old and had learned from 2 older brothers who had never once gone easy on him. The white queen took 3 black pieces in succession. The black king's options collapsed. 14 moves, and the black king threw down its crown, and the door at the far end of the room swung open without anyone touching it. Go, Ron said. He was already moving to the side of the board, out of the way, unhurt. Both of you. Ron, Hermione started. I'm fine, he said, and he was fine, and he waved them through with the slightly impatient gesture of someone who has a role in the plan and wants the plan to continue. Go. Send Fawkes back when you're through if you need to. Harry looked at him once. Ron looked back at him with the expression that said I know what I'm doing and so do you, so go. They went. The 4th obstacle was a troll, already unconscious on the floor. Someone had dealt with it before them, which meant Quirrell had been through here recently. Harry stepped over one enormous foot and kept moving without slowing. The 5th obstacle was the potions room. A line of bottles on a table, a riddle in verse on a wall, fire in front of the door they'd come through and black flame in front of the door ahead. Hermione read the riddle in 15 seconds and solved it in 4 more, because Hermione, and she pointed at a small round bottle on the right end of the line and said, forward, and then looked at the leftmost bottle and said, back, if you need to bring Ron through. Harry looked at the fire ahead and took the small round bottle. Cold liquid, small enough for 1 person, which meant it had been designed to limit. He looked at Hermione. Go back and get Ron, he said. Then go back further. Both of you, out. Harry, I need you safe for everything after this, he said, which was true, and was not the same as I need you out of danger, and the distinction was precise enough that she heard it clearly. Everything after this is longer than today. I need you both for the longer part. Hermione held his gaze. Then she picked up the leftmost bottle, the one for fire, and said, don't die. I won't, he said, with the same certainty he had for most things, the certainty that came not from arrogance but from the bone-deep understanding that he was exactly where he was supposed to be, doing exactly what he was built to do. She went back through the fire. Harry drank the small bottle. Cold spread through him, ice-clear and thin, and he walked through the black flame. The last room was large and dim and had the mirror of Eriste at its far end, exactly where it had been when he'd found it in the 7th floor junk room, which meant Dumbledore had moved it, or the castle had moved it, or the mirror had moved itself because very old enchanted objects sometimes did things like that. Quirrell was standing in front of it. He was not stammering. He was standing in front of the mirror with his hands clasped behind his back and his shoulders relaxed and his head tilted slightly, and the posture was the posture Harry had seen through the mask a handful of times, the sharp, patient, calculating posture of the thing that shared Quirrell's body. He was staring into the mirror with a focused intensity that had a desperate quality underneath it, tightly controlled but there, and Harry understood in a glance what was happening. Quirrell was seeing something in the mirror and reaching for it and it wasn't appearing. He could see the stone, probably, himself holding it, himself whole and restored and powerful, and wanting it utterly, and the mirror was giving him the vision and withholding the object, because that was exactly what the mirror was designed to do. Quirrell heard Harry come in and turned, and the mask was gone completely. The face was Quirrell's but the expression had never belonged to Quirrell. It was old and flat and precise, with a hunger in it that had been burning for decades and had not been diminished by years of half-existence, only concentrated. Harry Potter, it said. Not Quirrell's voice, but with something else driving it, something that turned the vowels cold. I wondered how long it would take you. Not long, Harry said. He stopped 10 feet from Quirrell and looked at him with the same level attention he gave everything. Fawkes was very still and very hot on his shoulder. You couldn't get it. A temporary complication, Quirrell said. He tilted his head. The gesture was Quirrell's, the assessment behind it wasn't. The mirror gives the stone only to someone who does not wish to use it. A clever design. Dumbledore's best work, I think. The thin mouth curved. But you will find it for me. No, Harry said. You will, Quirrell said, with the flat patience of something that has not been contradicted in a very long time and is not particularly concerned about the possibility. Or I will kill you. You are 11 years old, Potter, and there is no version of this encounter in which you present a serious, Fawkes sang. It was not the sleep song he'd used on the dog. It was not the keynote. It was something Harry had never heard before, a full-throated, complex sound that built from a single note into something that occupied the entire room simultaneously, that bounced off the stone walls and the flagstone floor and the surface of the mirror and came back amplified, layered, a sound that had a color if sounds could have colors, and the color was gold, the way fire is gold, the way dawn over high ground is gold, the way the last thing before darkness is sometimes, briefly, gold. The thing in Quirrell went very still. Fawkes, it said, and the word came out different from everything else it had said, not cold, not calculating. Something much older than the hunger in its voice, something that predated Lord Voldemort and predated Tom Riddle entirely, something from the deep history of a man who had stood in a firelit office and looked at a phoenix for the first time and felt the specific terror of something beautiful that you cannot own. Harry walked to the mirror while Quirrell stood frozen in the song. He stood before it and looked into it and saw exactly what he'd known he would see. His parents. Not as he'd imagined them from photographs, living, warm, his mother with her red hair loose around her shoulders and his father with the same messy hair and the same jaw, both of them looking at Harry with an expression that wasn't longing or grief. Just, there. Just present, the way parents are present when you have parents, the taken-for-granted miracle of it. His mother raised one hand and touched the glass from the other side and smiled, and it was the smile of someone who has been watching for a long time and is glad at what they've seen. Harry looked at his reflection in the mirror. His mirror self reached into its pocket and pulled out a blood-red stone and held it up, and Harry felt something press into his actual hand, solid and smooth and heavy, and looked down. The Philosopher's Stone. It sat in his palm and caught the dim light and threw it back red, and it was real, entirely real, and Harry closed his fingers around it and turned from the mirror. Quirrell's hand shot out. The song cut off. The hand closed around Harry's wrist and Harry felt it immediately, the burning, the same burning his mother's sacrifice had always promised and delivered, the contact that was specifically, personally fatal to anything carrying a piece of Voldemort's fractured soul. Quirrell gasped. His hand began to disintegrate at the fingers, not slowly, not dramatically, just coming apart the way ash comes apart when you disturb it, the binding structure failing from the point of contact outward. Impossible, said the voice that was not Quirrell's. Impossible, you're a child, the protection is my mother's, Harry said. He didn't pull his wrist away. He held still and let it work, the way you hold a flame steady when the wind is trying to blow it out. Not mine. Quirrell's face twisted. Both of them, Quirrell's pain and the thing's fury, fighting for the same face at the same time, and beneath both of them, very briefly, just a glimpse of something that might have been the original Quirrell, frightened and exhausted and as much a victim as anyone else in this room. Then the shadow rose. It came out of the back of Quirrell's head like smoke out of a broken chimney, dark, cold, and furious, and it was not a body and not a voice, only a presence, pressing against the room's air the way cold presses against warmth, looking for a way through. Harry felt it touch him and recoil, testing the boundary of the protection with the desperate hunger of something that has been half alive for a decade and come this close and found the last inch impassable. Quirrell's body crumpled to the floor. The shadow swept toward Harry in one last surge and Harry stood his ground and Fawkes spread his wings and the gold light of them hit the shadow like morning hits fog and the shadow tore, shredded, and the scream it made was not sound, or not only sound, it was the specific register of something being forced back to where it had come from and knowing it. Then it was gone. The cold in the room unwound itself over 3 or 4 seconds and the air returned to normal temperature and Quirrell lay on the floor, still breathing, barely, and Harry stood in the space where Voldemort had been with the Philosopher's Stone in his closed fist and Fawkes on his shoulder, and the mirror behind him showing nothing now but its own inscription and the dim stone room, and his hand didn't shake. He was breathing hard. He allowed himself that. But his hand didn't shake. He went to Quirrell and crouched beside him. The man's face was slack, the controlling presence gone, and what remained was young, younger than Harry had thought, a face in its late 20s or early 30s with the lines that living with Voldemort in your head would put there, deep and exhausted. The man was not dead. His chest rose and fell. His hands were grey at the fingers where the contact had damaged them, but the damage had stopped the moment Voldemort left. Harry stayed crouched beside him for a moment. "He used you," Harry said, to the unconscious man. Not loudly. Not as a condemnation. Just saying the true thing in the direction of the person it belonged to. "That wasn't your fault." He stood. He looked at the mirror once more. His parents were gone. The glass showed only him, 11 years old, hair catastrophically messy, the stone in his fist, a phoenix on his shoulder, standing in a room he'd walked into on purpose with his eyes open. He looked like himself. He hadn't expected how much that would matter. "Fawkes," he said. The phoenix turned to look at him. "I need Dumbledore," Harry said. "Can you?" Fawkes was already lifting off. He circled once, close, and his wing tip brushed Harry's cheek with the same deliberate gentleness as the first night at Hogwarts, and then he went up and through the ceiling as though the stone were water, and was gone, and the room was very quiet. Harry sat down on the floor next to Quirrell and waited. He thought about Voldemort, the shadow, the scream, the desperate hunger of it. He thought about a soul that had been splitting itself for decades, multiplying its anchors, making itself unkillable by distributing the parts of itself that could be killed into objects and hiding the objects and believing that enough preparation could hold death at arm's length forever. He thought about the 7 nodes and the catastrophic power that had been poured into that first great working, the ritual that had made the first Horcrux, and about how the toll of that working had been visible in the nodes for 60 years afterward, in the hollow warmth and the depleted stone. He thought about what it cost to refuse to die. He didn't have contempt for it, exactly. He understood fear. He understood the specific horror of not existing. He'd come close enough to it at the Dursleys to have a working theory about what drove someone toward that particular obsession. The thing that had been Voldemort was not alien to him. It was recognizable. It was what happened when the fear of loss became larger than everything you might lose. He was still thinking about this when Dumbledore came through the wall. Not through the door, through the wall, which was apparently something Dumbledore could do when urgency warranted it and which Harry filed in the expanding category of things Dumbledore had not yet fully explained but would be getting to. The old man took in the room in one sweep, Quirrell on the floor, Harry sitting beside him, the mirror showing nothing but reflection, the stone presumably in someone's possession because it was not on the floor. His eyes found Harry's closed fist. "You have it," Dumbledore said. "Yes," Harry said. He opened his hand. The stone sat on his palm, red and ordinary looking, like something you might skip across a lake on a good afternoon. Dumbledore crossed the room and looked at it. Then he looked at Harry. Then at Quirrell. "He's alive," he said, and it was not a question. "For now," Harry said. "His hands are damaged. He needs Pomfrey." Dumbledore waved his wand and Quirrell rose and floated, and Dumbledore kept his hand raised to maintain the levitation without apparent effort. His eyes returned to Harry. "Voldemort?" "Gone," Harry said. "The protection." He paused. "He tried to possess me. Couldn't make contact." He thought about the shadow recoiling from him, testing the boundary and finding it impassable. "Your mother's protection, I think." Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment, and his expression did the complicated thing it had done in the office in November, not one thing but several at once, layered, the visible top layer being relief and the visible second layer being something that cost him more to show. "Are you hurt?" "No," Harry said. He stood, because sitting on the floor while Dumbledore stood over him was a dynamic he didn't need. Quirrell's hands took the worst of it. The damage stopped when Voldemort left the body. Dumbledore nodded slowly. You did very well. I did what needed doing, Harry said, not correcting the compliment but not accepting it either. He looked at the stone in his palm. What happens to this now? I will contact Nicholas Flamel, Dumbledore said. He has been expecting this eventuality. He and his wife have made their peace with, he paused delicately. The stone being destroyed, Harry said. Yes. Dumbledore met his eyes. They are very old. Harry held the stone up and looked at it through the dim light. Inside the red stone there was a quality of depth that made it seem larger than its physical dimensions, something that went further in than it should. The accumulation of 600 years of Flamel's work, the impossible alchemy of transmutation and life extension, sitting in the palm of a first-year who had walked through 7 obstacles and picked it up from his own reflection. Destroy it now, Harry said. He held it out. Dumbledore blinked. Now. If you take it from this room it can be taken from you, Harry said. Everything after the black flame is one-person corridors and you came through a wall, which means there's an exit from here that doesn't go back through the obstacles. But the stone is still a risk until it doesn't exist. He met Dumbledore's eyes. Nicholas Flamel agreed it should be destroyed. So destroy it. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. Then he lowered the levitation spell, letting Quirrell settle gently to the floor. He could be collected in a moment, and drew his wand, and looked at the stone in Harry's outstretched palm. The Flamels will die, he said. Quietly. Not as an objection, just as the fact it was. They've had 600 years, Harry said, not unkindly. And they chose this. Dumbledore pointed his wand at the stone and spoke 3 words Harry hadn't learned and didn't need to, and the stone shattered. Not into pieces, into light, a warm red light that expanded outward for 2 seconds and then folded in on itself and was gone, and Harry's palm was empty and there was nothing left and the room felt, if anything, slightly lighter for the absence. Dumbledore stood with his wand extended for a moment after, and then lowered it, and looked at where the stone had been with an expression Harry recognized from the conversation in November, the expression of having done something irreversible and knowing it was right and feeling the weight of it anyway. Well, Dumbledore said. One down, Harry said. Dumbledore looked at him sharply. The Horcruxes, Harry said. The diary first, we talked about it in November and I've been thinking about it since. If it's somewhere accessible, Malfoy, Lucius Malfoy, his name keeps appearing in Hermione's research on Voldemort's known associates, then it needs to be found before next year. Before it can be used. Harry, Dumbledore said carefully. You have just survived a very significant encounter. You don't need to, I know I don't need to, Harry said. I want to. This year confirmed the shape of things. Voldemort is coming back, not today, not this year, but eventually, unless we remove what he's anchored himself to. We discussed this. We agreed. He looked at Dumbledore evenly. Has that changed? Dumbledore's careful expression shifted. Then he said, no. It hasn't changed. Then I'd like you to look into Lucius Malfoy's holdings over the summer, Harry said. Formally, if the Ministry will do it. Informally, if not. A beat. I'd rather you used your influence to move that forward than to protect me from information I've already demonstrated I can handle. The corner of Dumbledore's mouth moved. It was the almost smile he'd shown in the office in November, and this time it went a fraction further. I'll begin the inquiries before term ends, he said. Good, Harry said. Fawkes came back through the ceiling, circling once in the low room before landing on Harry's shoulder, and he was warm with the particular satisfaction of a creature that has done what it was made for and found the result sufficient. Harry raised one hand and touched the wing, the same gesture as the first night in the Great Hall, automatic, now, as natural as reaching for a railing on a dark stair. Quirrell on the floor stirred slightly and made a small sound. I'll take him to Pomfrey, Dumbledore said, lifting the levitation again. He moved toward the wall he'd come through, and then stopped. Harry. What you said to him? He gestured at Quirrell. Before I arrived. That it wasn't his fault. Harry looked at him. You heard that? Fawkes, Dumbledore said simply. Fawkes was with me when he came to find me. I heard what he heard. He looked at Harry with the expression that was not the warm headmaster and not the strategist. Not many people would have thought to say that. Harry shrugged once. It was true. Yes, Dumbledore said. It was. He paused. The power the Dark Lord knows not, he said, and it was barely audible, and then he walked through the wall with Quirrell floating ahead of him, and was gone. Harry stood in the empty room. The mirror reflected him back, just him, no stone, no shadow, no vision of his parents, just Harry, standing very still in a room at the bottom of a castle, with a phoenix on his shoulder and an empty palm and a mind full of what came next. He looked at himself for a long moment. Then he turned and walked back through the obstacles. The black flame let him through. The potion room was empty of Hermione's presence, but her notes were on the table. She had left him notes, because she was Hermione, annotations on the riddle with 3 additional observations that hadn't been necessary but were characteristically thorough, and he smiled at them properly, genuinely, and left them where they were. The chess room was empty too. No sign of struggle, the pieces returned to their starting positions, the board reset the way enchanted things reset when their purpose was served. He moved through it. In the key room he found the broom still leaning against the wall, the keys still circling the ceiling with the vague purposefulness of very simple enchantments that hadn't been told to stop yet. He didn't need a broom. He walked through. The Devil's Snare room was quiet, the plants having retreated to the edges when the light came through. He went through the trapdoor, upward, which was possible because the castle made it possible when you needed it to be, and through the trapdoor above. The dog was still sleeping. Harry walked past 3 massive heads and 3 sets of gently flapping jowls and opened the door into the 3rd-floor corridor, and the door closed behind him, and the corridor was quiet and ordinary and smelled of old stone and the beginning of summer that was already working its way through the castle's windows. Ron and Hermione were there. They were sitting on the floor of the corridor with their backs against the wall, which suggested they had been sitting there for some time rather than pacing, which suggested they had both independently decided that pacing was not what this situation required. Ron had a chocolate frog card balanced on one knee. Hermione had a book open on her lap, though Harry noticed she hadn't turned a page in however long she'd been sitting. They looked up at the same moment. Harry raised his empty palm. Gone, he said. Stones destroyed. Voldemort's gone, temporarily. Quirrell's with Pomfrey. He leaned against the wall across from them and slid down it until he was also sitting on the floor, which seemed like the right way to deliver information about a confrontation with the remnant of the darkest wizard in a century. Everyone's fine. Ron put the chocolate frog card back in his pocket with the neatness of someone closing a chapter. The stone is destroyed. Dumbledore, Harry said. Right there in the room. Seemed like the safest option. It was, Hermione said, immediately, with the tone of someone whose analysis had reached the same conclusion and was glad the practical outcome matched. Then, what did Voldemort's shadow feel like? Ron looked at her. That's your first question. I want to understand what we're dealing with for next time, she said, entirely reasonably. Cold, Harry said. And hungry. Like standing next to something that hasn't been full in a very long time and can feel the distance between what it is and what it wants to be. He thought about it. There was nothing human left in it. Whatever Tom Riddle was, curious, brilliant, controlled, the fragment that was in Quirrell was just the hunger with nothing around it. Because the soul-splitting degrades what remains, Hermione said quietly. Each time. The piece gets smaller and darker. She paused. That's what the books won't say directly. They describe the magic but not the cost. He paid it willingly, Harry said. That's the part that matters. The corridor was quiet. Through a window at the end of it, the evening light was coming in low and golden, the long June light that arrives in Scotland later than everywhere else and stays longer, stretching the end of the day out generously. 6 to go, Ron said. He wasn't asking. He was naming it, the way you name something to make it real and manageable, to give it a shape that can be addressed. At least, Harry said. Dumbledore isn't certain of the exact number. But the pattern suggests 6 objects plus whatever's in Voldemort himself. We find them, Hermione said. We destroy them. She said it the way she said most things, as a plan rather than a wish, already thinking forward. Not alone, Harry said. He looked at both of them. Not just us 3. We're going to need more. Better information. Access to things the library won't give us and that the restricted section mostly won't give us either. He thought about the summer ahead, about Dumbledore's promise to investigate Lucius Malfoy, about the 7th node still pulsing its last thread below the castle's foundations. But yes. We find them. We destroy them. We finish this. Fawkes, who had been quiet on his shoulder since they'd left the room below, opened his wings fully, not a flight posture, not the alert spread, just the full extension of something very beautiful choosing to be fully seen, and sang 3 notes that moved through the corridor like light through water, warm and refracting, filling all the spaces simultaneously. The sound reached Harry's chest and the warmth there answered it, and then the sound reached Ron and he sat up straighter without seeming to notice he'd done it, and the sound reached Hermione and she closed her book with the deliberate motion of someone putting away one thing because they have decided to pick up something else, something larger. The song ended. The corridor held its echo for a moment. Right, Ron said. He stood up, offered Harry a hand up, which Harry took, then offered Hermione a hand, which she accepted with less performance than she would have in September. Dinner's still on for another 20 minutes. I don't know about you two, but I went through an enchanted chess match and a troll and the entire trip to the hospital wing for Hermione's eye, he pointed at the healed-over scar from the Halloween bathroom, on an empty stomach, and I intend to eat enough tonight to make up for the whole day. The troll was in October, Hermione said. I'm backdating my hunger, Ron said. Harry laughed. It surprised him, the way genuine laughter sometimes does when it arrives without announcement, a quick, real sound that bounced off the corridor stone and dissolved into the June evening light. He couldn't remember the last time he'd laughed at something without checking first whether it was safe to. He didn't check. He just laughed. They went down to dinner. Harry ate. The great hall was full of end-of-year noise, exams finished, summer almost arrived, older students talking about going home with the divided feelings of people who had 2 homes and hadn't entirely sorted out which one was real. The enchanted ceiling above was still the ceiling Fawkes had burned open in September, Dumbledore had made no move to repair it, which Harry was fairly certain was deliberate, and the constellation map's markings were still visible in the burned edges, faint in the evening light, legible to anyone who knew what to look for. Harry looked at it for a long time over his dinner. 33 stars. 7 nodes. A plan that Dumbledore had built over a decade and hidden in the bones of his own castle, waiting for a phoenix to burn it open. And a phoenix that had flown the full length of the room and chosen an 11-year-old who was, at the time, standing very still and paying attention. I show not your face but your heart's desire. He'd stood in front of that mirror and seen his parents, and the stone had appeared in his hand, and the deepest desire of Harry Potter, the boy who had lived in a cupboard and learned to be invisible and survived everything the Dursleys had offered as an alternative to love, was not power or victory or safety. It was this. Exactly this. The great hall, the noise, Ron arguing with himself about whether to have a 4th piece of chicken, Hermione annotating something in the margin of a book she was reading while eating, which was a habit Harry had initially found strange and now found completely characteristic. Fawkes warm on the back of his chair turning his amber eyes toward the constellation map with the patient attention of something that has been waiting for a long story to arrive at a turning point. This was the desire. Being here. Belonging here. Being seen. The stone had come to him not because he was powerful enough to take it but because the only thing he wanted was already in his hands, and the mirror knew it, and the stone went to the only safe place it had ever been. Under the map Fawkes had burned open, the seventh node pulsed in the deep dark below the castle's foundations, its last thread alive and waiting. 6 Horcruxes somewhere in the world needed finding. A war that had paused needed finishing. A prophecy that had made Harry a piece needed him to stop being a piece and keep being a person. He reached for his pumpkin juice. He looked at the ceiling. He had a whole summer to think about it. Chapter 6, 33 stars. The last week of term had a specific quality that Harry hadn't encountered before, the loosening of a place that has been held tightly all year, the way a fist opens when the reason for holding has passed. Exams finished on Wednesday. Thursday came in warm and blue-skied, genuine early summer arriving in Scotland with the surprised enthusiasm of something that hadn't expected to be welcome, and the castle exhaled. Harry spent Thursday morning on the Quidditch pitch alone. Not flying, sitting, cross-legged, at the center of the pitch where the grass was worn flattest from a year of practices and where the morning light came in at a low angle that made the dew on every blade visible simultaneously. Fawkes sat on the grass beside him, wings folded, occasionally turning his head to track a bird across the sky with the professional interest of a creature that took aviation seriously. Harry had been thinking since the room below the trapdoor. He'd been thinking in the dense, productive way that required stillness and time and no one asking him questions, which Hermione and Ron had both correctly identified and accommodated without being asked. Hermione had gone to the library. Ron had gone to write a letter to his mother that was apparently overdue by 2 months. They'd left Harry to his thinking with the ease of people who had, over 9 months, developed a very accurate model of what he needed and when. What he was thinking about was Voldemort's scream. Not the sound of it, the content of it. The scream had been the sound of a soul fragment being forced back, yes, but underneath the forced retreat there was a quality he'd been turning over for 3 days. It hadn't sounded like pain exactly, or not only pain. It had sounded, in the way that sounds without words sometimes carry meaning that words can't, like recognition. Like the Shadow had expected to lose this particular encounter and had been waiting for it, half resigned, and the resignation was worse than the fear would have been. Voldemort had been afraid of this moment. Not afraid of Harry, not of an 11-year-old specifically, but afraid of what the moment represented. The Phoenix Bond. His mother's protection. The combination of them in a single body that he couldn't touch. He had come to the castle this year knowing, probably, that the odds were against him. He'd come anyway because the stone was the only option and the options were narrowing and the hunger was too large for caution. Desperation, Harry thought. Strip away the decades of terror and the Horcruxes and the followers and the dark reputation, and what was driving Voldemort right now was desperation. He was less than he had been. He was a fraction of a fraction, borrowing bodies, unable to hold his own form, needing a stone that had now been destroyed. The war he was building toward was real, the danger was real, but the thing building it was diminished in ways it couldn't fully compensate for. That mattered. Not as comfort, Harry didn't need comfort, but as information. A desperate enemy made different decisions than a confident one. Fawkes turned from the sky and looked at him. The amber eyes were very steady. "He'll find another way," Harry said. "The stone is gone but he's still anchored. 6 Horcruxes, at least. He'll find another way to rebuild himself." He paused. "How long do we have?" Fawkes didn't answer in words. He answered in the way he answered most direct questions. He spread one wing, very slowly, and then folded it, and the movement had a quality Harry had learned to read over 9 months. Measured time. Not long, but not immediate. A handful of years, maybe. Enough for preparation, not enough for complacency. "Right," Harry said. "Summer, then." He stood up, brushing damp grass off his jeans, and walked back to the castle. The hospital wing was on the 3rd floor, east corridor, and Quirrell had been there since Monday. Harry had been told this by Dumbledore in passing, a quiet word after the end-of-term feast on Tuesday, delivered with the careful neutrality of a man navigating a situation that had several ethical layers. Quirrell's hands were healing. He had no memory of the last several months that was consistent or reliable. The ministry had been notified. Several important people were asking several pointed questions. Harry had not been to see him. He'd been deciding whether to, and he'd decided, on Thursday morning's damp pitch, that he would. He went Thursday afternoon. The hospital wing was nearly empty, a sixth year with a Quidditch injury from the last practice of the season, deep in a potion-induced sleep with both arms splinted. Madame Pomfrey's office door was closed. The windows were open and the afternoon came through them in long warm rectangles, and the room smelled of the specific combination of dittany and clean linen that Harry had learned to associate with Pomfrey's particular brand of competent care. Quirrell was in the last bed, sitting up, looking out the window with the vacancy of someone who has been given something for pain and is not entirely present. His hands were bandaged. He looked younger without the turban and the performance, genuinely young, and genuinely depleted, and when he heard Harry approach he turned and for a moment his face went through something complicated that resolved into a wariness that was entirely his own, the first entirely his own expression Harry had seen on him. "Potter," he said. His voice was his own too, without the stammer and without the other thing. Just a voice that belonged to a 26-year-old from Yorkshire who had taken a job he hadn't understood and had been used for it. "I'm not here to ask questions," Harry said. He sat in the chair beside the bed, which was the position of someone who intended to stay, not the position of someone delivering a message. "I just wanted to see how you were." Quirrell looked at him. He had the expression of someone who had been expecting interrogation and had received something that didn't fit the category. "Why?" he said, and it was a genuine question. "Because what happened to you wasn't your fault," Harry said. "I said it in the room because it was true then and it's still true." He looked at the bandaged hands. The damage had stopped at the wrists where contact with Harry's skin had ended. The fingers were wrapped but present. "Are they going to be all right?" "Pomfrey says yes," Quirrell said. He looked at his hands as though they belonged to a version of himself he was still getting acquainted with. "Full function, she thinks, in a few weeks." He was quiet for a moment. "Then, I know what I did." What he used me to do." "I can't recover all of it but I know the shape of it." "Yes," Harry said. "I don't expect," Quirrell stopped. Started again. "I know there's an investigation. The ministry." He said the word with the particular tone of someone who has encountered ministry inquiries before and has calibrated expectations accordingly. "Dumbledore's involved in that," Harry said. "He's not going to let you be made the explanation for everything. That's not a promise I'm authorized to make but it's what I've observed of how he handles things." He met Quirrell's eyes. "You were possessed. That's a different thing from complicity." Quirrell looked at him for a long time. "You're 11 years old," he said, not dismissively but with the genuine surprise of someone recalibrating. "So I've been told," Harry said. "Quite a lot this year." Something moved through Quirrell's face that was not quite a smile but was in the same family. It was the expression of a man who has been in a very dark place for a very long time and has unexpectedly been shown a window, and doesn't fully trust the light yet but can see that it's real. "He talked about you," Quirrell said. While I could hear him. He talked about you the way he talked about very few things." He paused. "He was afraid of you." "He was afraid of what I represent," Harry said. "The bond. My mother's sacrifice." He thought about the shadow recoiling. "I'm just a person." He didn't think so, Quirrell said quietly. "He was wrong about a lot of things," Harry said. He stood. "Pomfrey'll be out in a minute, I think, she does rounds at 4. I'll leave you to it." He looked at Quirrell once more, directly and simply. "Take care of yourself." He left. In the corridor he stood for a moment and breathed the castle air, stone and age, and somewhere below it the green smell of June coming through a window at the corridor's end, and Fawkes on his shoulder sang the 2 quiet notes from the very first night. Not the key note, not the sleep song. Just the two notes that had always meant this is right. Yeah, Harry said. I know. He went to find Dumbledore. The headmaster was in the Great Hall supervising the removal of the House Point hourglasses, which were being taken down for their end-of-year cleaning by two house elves who moved with the speed and certainty of creatures that have been doing the same task for a very long time. Gryffindor had won the House Cup, a development that had produced, at the closing feast the night before, the specific kind of Slytherin silence that contains several hundred different emotions all committed to expressing none of them. Dumbledore saw Harry coming and dismissed the house elves with a word, and they vanished with the hourglasses, and the Great Hall was empty. It was strange to see it empty. The full dimensions of the room became apparent without tables and students and noise, the ceiling very high and very open, the 33 burned gaps still there, still showing the constellation map's carved edges in the stone. The morning's blue sky had given way to a high white afternoon, and the light through the gaps was direct and precise, falling in 33 separate columns through the hall. Harry stopped in the middle of the room and looked up. Dumbledore stood beside him and also looked up. You're not going to repair it, Harry said. No, Dumbledore said. I've decided not to. Because it's useful for it to be visible, Harry said. The map. You want it seen. I want it remembered, Dumbledore said. There is a difference, but a small one. He looked at the constellation map with the expression of a man looking at his own handwriting from a long time ago. I built it in 1945. After Grindelwald. After, a great many things that I had thought I understood and discovered I had not. He paused. I believed then that the next great confrontation would require exactly this, someone with a phoenix bond, able to read the ley lines, able to understand the full scope of what Riddle had done. I believed I could architect the conditions for that person to exist. And you were mostly right, Harry said. Mostly, Dumbledore agreed, and the word carried a great deal. Harry looked at the 7 nodes' positions on the map. He'd been looking at Hermione's diagram for 9 months and had the layout memorized to the inch, and now he stood underneath the original and checked his memory against it and found it accurate. 7 nodes. The deep 7th at the map's center, the others arranged around it in a pattern that was not quite symmetrical, not an aesthetically arranged map but a functional one, placed according to where the ley lines actually ran, the honest geography of the castle's magical foundations. The 7th node, Harry said. Still has something in it. Yes, Dumbledore said. I've been thinking about that, Harry said. The thread that survived the drain. The last fraction. I could feel it when I put my hands on the trophy room flagstone and Fawkes amplified the connection. He turned to look at Dumbledore. What did he store in them? Before he drained them. What filled 7 nodes before the ritual? Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. I believe, and this is theory, not certainty, that he filled them over the course of his school years. Drawing from the ley lines, incrementally, each visit to each node adding to the store. 6 years of accumulation across 7 reservoirs. He paused. Hogwarts's ley lines produce a specific quality of ambient magic, old, stable, layered. Not raw power in the way a ley line in an unsettled place would be. This castle's magic is, particular. It has character. It recognizes things, Harry said. People. The bond. He thought about the door to the headmaster's office opening without the password. The castle's been helping me all year. Yes, Dumbledore said, and this surprised him slightly. Harry could tell, he'd known it was a possibility but hadn't been certain Harry had noticed. The castle responds to the Phoenix bond. It always has. Fawkes has been part of Hogwarts for as long as I have been here, and his bond with the school runs deeper than any single headmaster's tenure. He looked at Fawkes. When he transferred his bond to you, the castle followed, in some sense. So the remaining thread in the 7th node, Harry said. The castle kept it. Not because Riddle failed to take it but because it resisted. It's not his magic that's left in there. It's the castle's own. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. That is, he said slowly, a more accurate characterization than any I have produced myself. What does that mean for the nodes as a system? Harry said. If the seventh was never fully drained, if the core of the system is still functional, can the others be refilled? From the ley lines, the same way Riddle filled them originally, but slowly, over time. Dumbledore turned to look at him fully. Are you suggesting that the ley line system could be restored? I'm asking whether it's possible, Harry said. Riddle used it as a weapon. He drained something that had been building for centuries into a single moment of catastrophic working. But the architecture is still there. 7 nodes, still connected, 7th still alive. He met Dumbledore's eyes. What could a full system do? Used as it was originally intended, as a reservoir rather than a bomb? Dumbledore looked at the map above them. He was quiet for long enough that Harry waited without prompting, because Dumbledore's productive silences were different from his deflection silences and this was a productive one. The castle's original architects, Dumbledore said at last, built the node system as a stabilizing mechanism. Not a weapon, not a power source for individual use. A foundation. The ambient magic of 4 very powerful founders, plus the ley lines beneath, plus the accumulated magic of centuries of use by students and teachers, all of it channeled, balanced, stored. The castle maintains itself partly through that system. He paused. A fully restored system would make Hogwarts considerably more resilient than it currently is. As a refuge, as a stronghold, as a place of protection. He looked at Harry. Considerably harder to breach. For a war, Harry said. For what is coming, Dumbledore said. They stood in the columns of light falling through 33 burned gaps, and the map above them connected its 7 nodes in lines that had been waiting 50 years to be read, and the 7th node below them pulsed its surviving thread in the deep dark below the castle's foundations. I'll start on it this year, Harry said. 2nd year. I'll work with the nodes, the same way I've been working with the trophy room. With Fawkes amplifying the connection. Slowly, incrementally, the way Riddle filled them in the first place. He looked at Dumbledore. I'll need to know where the other 6 physical locations are precisely. Not just the diagram coordinates, the actual stones. I'll prepare a detailed map, Dumbledore said, with the tone of a man making a note. Over the summer. Thank you. Harry looked up at the ceiling once more. The Horcruxes. Yes. Tell me what you found this week. Malfoy. Dumbledore produced a small leather notebook from his robes, prepared, Harry noticed, which meant he'd been expecting this conversation and had come to it equipped. Lucius Malfoy made a number of suspicious acquisitions in the months before Voldemort's fall, he said, opening the notebook to a marked page. Dark objects, several of them documented. Among them, a diary. Dated, intriguingly, to the period when Tom Riddle would have been 16. He looked up. I have not been able to confirm possession. But the acquisition record exists. Draco starts in September, Harry said. Yes. If Lucius has the diary and he sends it to Hogwarts via Draco, whether deliberately or otherwise, it's accessible. Possibly dangerous. The diary is not a passive Horcrux. He thought about this. Riddle was 16 when he made it. 16 and brilliant and proud. He would have put something of himself in it that was capable of more than just anchoring. It would be interactive. Communicative. He'd want the piece of himself from that age to have a voice. Dumbledore looked at him with an expression that was past calculation and past strategy into something raw. Yes, he said. I believe you're right. Then we need to find it before it finds a host, Harry said. If Malfoy puts it into circulation, even accidentally, and it finds someone in this castle who's lonely enough or unhappy enough to talk to it, Ginny Weasley, Dumbledore said, very quietly. Arthur Weasley's youngest child. She will be starting Hogwarts in September. By all accounts she is, he paused carefully, an imaginative child who keeps a diary herself. The name landed with a weight that Harry felt in his chest. Ron's sister. He'd heard about Ginny across a year of Ron's family stories, the youngest Weasley, the only girl, who had wanted to come to Hogwarts so badly she tried to sneak onto the train at age 6. "Tell Lucius Malfoy under investigation," Harry said. "Whatever the Ministry can do. Make it active and make it visible. If Malfoy knows he's being watched, he's less likely to put the diary into play." "I've already initiated preliminary inquiries," Dumbledore said. "Through Arthur Weasley at the Ministry," quietly. He met Harry's eyes. "I will make them less quiet." "Good." Harry breathed. The columns of light through the ceiling had shifted with the afternoon, moving slightly westward, and the map's markings were catching the light differently now, some of the carved lines picking up the direct sun and glowing faintly bronze. "One more thing." "Yes." "The prophecy," Harry said. "The full text. Either must die at the hand of the other. That's how it ends." He met Dumbledore's eyes directly. "Does that mean I have to die?" Dumbledore went very still. "I've been thinking about it," Harry said, in the same flat factual tone he used for things that were large enough to require plainness. "If Voldemort is an anchor, and the Horcruxes are anchors, but there's also the night he came for me, the night he tried to kill me and couldn't, there's a question about what happened to the piece of soul that was supposed to be used on me. Whether some fragment of it went elsewhere." He held Dumbledore's gaze. "Into me." The silence was very long. "Harry," Dumbledore started. "Don't manage this," Harry said quietly. "Don't decide what I'm ready for. You said you would tell me what I ask. So tell me." Dumbledore closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them they were very bright and very steady, and he said, with the careful precision of a man giving a truth that costs him, "I have a theory. It is not confirmed. I have no way to confirm it without access to knowledge that I am still working to obtain." He paused. "The night Voldemort's curse rebounded. The energy of the killing curse with nowhere to go. The soul of a man who had split himself so many times that a fragment could, in the right circumstances, transfer itself involuntarily." He looked at Harry's scar. "If that happened. If a fragment attached itself to the only living thing in the room, then I'm a Horcrux," Harry said. The word sat in the hall between them with its full weight. Dumbledore didn't answer. But he didn't refute it either, and the not refuting was its own kind of answer. "That's what the prophecy is protecting," Harry said. "That's the devastation you were reaching for when you said the word in November. Not the work of finding and destroying the others, that's significant but survivable. This is the one that," he stopped. "Then, this is the one where either must die at the hand of the other might mean that the only way to destroy this particular Horcrux is, I don't know," Dumbledore said. "I genuinely do not know. The theory may be entirely wrong. And if it is right, the solution, if there is one, may not be what the most obvious reading suggests." He looked at Harry with something that had abandoned calculation entirely. "I will spend every hour available to me this summer searching for an answer that doesn't require what you're afraid it requires." "I'm not afraid of it," Harry said. "I know," Dumbledore said, and the two words carried the weight of someone who had spent a decade worrying about whether the boy he'd built this plan around would be strong enough for it, and had just been answered definitively and found no comfort in the answer, because this was the specific grief of a teacher who had hoped to be wrong about the hardest part. "I'm not going to go looking to die," Harry said. "And I'm not going to avoid living while I figure out whether I have to. There's a difference." He looked at Fawkes. "Phoenixes burn and come back. That's what they do." Fawkes looked back at him with the amber eyes that had seen everything and forgotten nothing. He didn't sing. He just looked, the way old things look when they are telling you something that doesn't need sound. "Yes," Harry said to him. "I know." He turned back to Dumbledore. "Work on it this summer. I'll work on the nodes. In September we start on the Horcruxes properly, together, with everything you know and everything I've found. Hermione and Ron are involved. I'm not negotiating that. No, Dumbledore said. I wouldn't expect you to. And if you find something I need to know, about the theory, about the diary, about anything, you write to me directly. Not through a third party, not filtered through what you think I can manage. Directly. Yes, Dumbledore said. All right, Harry said. He looked up at the map one last time. 33 stars. 7 nodes. A plan that had been built without his knowledge and that he was now standing inside with his eyes open, having changed its shape simply by knowing what it was. Tell me about Grindelwald, he said. Dumbledore blinked. I beg your pardon. You said you built the map in 1945 after Grindelwald, Harry said. After things you thought you understood and discovered you hadn't. You defeated Grindelwald in 1945, the greatest dark wizard before Voldemort. He met Dumbledore's eyes. What did you discover you hadn't understood? A very long pause. The afternoon light moved another fraction westward. The columns through the ceiling shifted. That power and love are not opposites, Dumbledore said at last, very quietly. That someone can love very much and do very great harm. That the most dangerous decisions are the ones made by people who are certain they are right. He looked at Harry. I was certain I was right about many things in 1945. I was right about Grindelwald. I was wrong about other things. He paused. The decisions that led to your years at the Dursleys are not the first time I have mistaken necessity for rightness. But you keep making them, Harry said. Not unkindly. Yes, Dumbledore said. I keep making them. And then I live with them. He held Harry's gaze. I am trying, genuinely, to learn the difference. At 115 years old, which suggests I am a slow learner in certain domains. Most people are slow learners in their own domain, Harry said. The things that come easily don't teach you anything. Dumbledore looked at him. That, he said, is extremely wise for 11. I had a lot of time to think in a cupboard, Harry said. He didn't say it for sympathy. He didn't say it as an accusation. He said it the way he said things that were true, plainly, because plainness was respect for the truth, not a performance of it. And Dumbledore received it that way, quietly, without flinching, with the specific dignity of a person accepting the full weight of what they have done rather than the abridged version. They stood together under the map for another minute, not speaking, the afternoon filling the hall with warmth that had nowhere particular to be and was content to just be there, and the map above them held its 7 nodes in the lines Dumbledore had carved 50 years ago, and Fawkes was warm and still on Harry's shoulder. Then Ron and Hermione came through the great hall's main doors. They came in talking to each other, mid-conversation, Hermione with a book under her arm and Ron carrying what appeared to be a very large sandwich, and they were arguing about something with the ease of two people who had been arguing companionably for most of a year and had found it one of the more reliable features of their friendship. They stopped when they saw Harry and Dumbledore standing in the middle of the empty hall. Ron looked at Dumbledore. Dumbledore looked at Ron. Ron appeared to perform a rapid internal calculation about the appropriate way to hold a large sandwich in the presence of the headmaster and concluded there was no appropriate way and carried on holding it. Ron, Harry said. Hermione. They crossed the hall and stood with Harry in the columns of light, and Harry looked at both of them and said, Dumbledore's going to tell you everything I know. Everything about the Horcruxes, the map, the nodes, the prophecy. He looked at Dumbledore. All of it. Dumbledore looked at the three of them, at Ron with his sandwich and his steady brown eyes, at Hermione with her book and her extraordinary mind already visibly running calculations on the word everything, at Harry with his phoenix and his scar and the particular unafraid quality that Fawkes had recognized across the length of the Great Hall 9 months ago. Yes, Dumbledore said. All of it. He sat down, right there on the hall floor, which was not dignified and which Harry suspected was the point, a man who had spent 60 years being the most important person in every room choosing, in this moment, to simply be someone sitting down with 3 children who had earned the truth. He settled his robes around him, folded his hands, and began to talk. He talked for a long time. He told them about Horcruxes from the beginning, from the research and the theory and the terrible elegant logic of it. He told them about his evidence for each suspected object. He told them about the diary and Lucius Malfoy. He told them about Slytherin's locket, which had entered the historical record and vanished from it again in the early 1970s. He told them about a cup belonging to Helga Hufflepuff, documented in a collection in the late 1960s and subsequently untraceable. He told them about a ring in the Gaunt family's possession, or what had been the Gaunt family before it collapsed into nothing. He told them about a diadem associated with Rowena Ravenclaw. He told them about the snake. He did not tell them about Harry's scar. That he left, and Harry left it too, because some things were still being worked out and were not yet ready to be words. Hermione's book was out within 5 minutes and she was taking notes, cross-referencing with things she'd apparently already read, asking questions at precise intervals that built the information into a structure as Dumbledore provided it. Her questions were good, specific, evidential, aimed at the gaps rather than the established points. Dumbledore answered them with the clear-eyed attention of someone who had been waiting to be asked the right questions by the right person. Ron said very little. He sat and listened and ate his sandwich with the focused quiet of someone who was building a map of the situation in his head rather than on paper, the spatial and relational intelligence that was his specific gift, turning information into layout, into where and how and who, the operational intelligence that sat beneath strategy and made it executable. Twice he asked questions that were not about the magic at all but about people, about who had been close to Voldemort, about who would have known enough to help hide objects, about the social architecture of the inner circle in the 1970s. Dumbledore answered these with the particular respect of a man who had not been asked these questions before and found them more useful than most of the questions he'd been asked. The afternoon moved westward through the ceiling and the columns of light shifted across the hall floor as the hours passed, and by the time Dumbledore finished the light was going golden and long and the great hall smelled of evening and the coming year was taking shape in the space between 4 people sitting on a flagstone floor. When he finished, there was a silence that was different from the silences before it, full rather than empty, the silence of a room after a fire has been laid rather than before. "The locket," Hermione said. "The cave you mentioned, Regulus Black. He was Voldemort's follower and then he wasn't. And then he died, and no one knows where." She looked up from her notes. "Creature. The Black family house elf. Regulus would have trusted him with something that mattered." Dumbledore looked at her. "I hadn't, yes. That line of inquiry is worth pursuing. I'll start a research track over the summer," she said. "Sirius Black is in Azkaban but the family home is," she paused. "Still standing, I think. If Creature is still there, he might know something." "Carefully," Dumbledore said. "Very carefully." "Obviously," Hermione said, in the tone of someone for whom carefully was the baseline rather than a modifier. Ron had his own notebook out now, a battered thing from his bag, filled with what appeared to be a combination of Quidditch statistics and class notes, and was writing something. He tore out the page and handed it to Harry without comment. It was a list. 7 items. Beside each item, a name, a location, a method of approach. Some of the entries were complete, some had question marks, some had Ask Hermione written in Ron's angular handwriting. It was not a polished document. It was a working document, the kind that gets made by people who have accepted a task and are thinking about how to do it rather than how it sounds. Harry looked at it. He looked at Ron. "Start of term," Ron said. "We go at it properly. One at a time. Methodically." He shrugged. "Fred and George have been sneaking in and out of the castle undetected for 4 years. They know things about this building that even Filch doesn't know. I'll get what I can over the summer." "You're going to ask Fred and George for strategic intelligence," Harry said. "They'll love it," Ron said. "Give them a reason that involves rule-breaking on a significant scale and they're extremely motivated." Harry looked at the list. He looked at the map on the ceiling. He looked at Hermione, who was already 3 pages into a new section of notes with the focused energy of someone who has just been given a problem sized exactly to their abilities. He looked at Dumbledore, who was watching the 3 of them with an expression that Harry recognized now, not the warm headmaster, not the strategist. The expression of someone who has put something down that they were never supposed to carry alone and is feeling, for the first time in a very long time, the specific relief of that. Fawkes spread his wings. Not the alert spread, not the sleep song spread. The full spread, both wings extended completely, and the late afternoon light came through the ceiling's 33 gaps and hit those wings and multiplied, filling the great hall with gold-red light that moved across the stone walls and the empty tables and the floor between them, and for a moment the hall was full of fire without burning anything, and the constellation map above glowed in its burned edges with the warmth of it. 33 stars connected by lines that had been waiting decades to be read clearly. Then Fawkes sang. The full voice, the full complex resonance that Harry had only heard once before, the voice that had frozen Quirrell in the room below the trapdoor, that had said things in the register below human hearing that Harry had only felt rather than heard. But this was not that song. This was different, no urgency in it, no command. Something much older than urgency. Something that filled the room the way the light filled it, entirely and without effort, reaching every corner and every stone simultaneously, and saying in the language of fire and deep time, "This is beginning. Not ending. Beginning." Harry stood under 33 stars in the empty great hall with his hand raised and Fawkes's song filling the air around him, and the map above him glowed, and Hermione was writing, and Ron was planning, and Dumbledore was sitting on the floor watching with his glacier blue eyes and his expression of a man finally, genuinely, trusting the outcome to someone else, and Harry Potter was 12 years old in September, and there were 6 Horcruxes left in the world, and a war building at the edges of a decade of uneasy peace, and a prophecy that ended one way or another, and a scar that prickled sometimes at the right questions, and a 7th node below his feet with a thread of surviving castle magic still pulsing in the dark, and he was completely, entirely, unafraid. Not because he didn't understand the size of what was coming. Because he did. He understood it the way he'd understood the lake on the September night they'd crossed it in boats. I am going somewhere, not just moving, and the understanding was not comfort exactly but something better than comfort, clarity. The specific clarity of a person who knows exactly where they are standing and has chosen to stand there. Fawkes folded his wings. The light in the hall settled back to ordinary gold. Harry looked at the constellation map one last time. 33 stars. 7 nodes. A plan that had been built around him and that he now stood at the center of, not as a piece but as a person, 11 years old, messy-haired, his dead mother's eyes and his dead father's jaw and a mind like a lock that had been given its key on the 1st of September in a hall exactly like this one, when something ancient and magnificent had flown the full length of the room and landed on his shoulder and said, without words, "I see you. I choose you. That's enough." He turned to the others. "Come on," he said. "Let's go outside. There's still 2 hours of light." And they went.